Call this meeting to order. Oh, you ready? Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. Can I have Councillors Begg and Claylough move the adoption of the agenda? Any questions? All in favor? That's carried. Any disclosures of interest with tonight's budget? Okay, staff reports. We have one staff report, ladies and gentlemen. That the Corporate Services Department Financial Services Division Report number 2021-240, subject 2022 capital and related projects budget be received, and that the 2022 capital and related projects budget as outlined in Report 2021-240 be approved, and that the projects identified in the 2022 capital and related projects budget be permitted to begin immediately where feasible. That the council delegate authority to the Chief Administrative Officer plus one of the Director, Corporate Services, Treasurer, or Director, Public Works to award and sign contracts and related documents associated to projects in the 2022 capital and related projects budget, following a procurement process as set out in the City of Port Colborne procurement policy, provided the related project has confirmed funding. I'll have Councillors Bruno and Desmarais move that. I'm now going to go to staff. Where is Mr. Bowles? There he is. Mr. Bowles, take it away. Brian, you're muted.
Thank you, Mayor. Good start for tonight. I'm just sharing my screen for council, and I'd like to as we can walk through the budget presentation, Appendix A to that report. So thank you everybody for coming tonight and having an opportunity to go through the 2022 capital and related project budget. I'll just remind everybody, and I'll thank staff for being on the meeting tonight. There's a number of staff here that's gonna be available to council to ask questions as the night goes through and as we go through the different projects. I might be the one presenting the budget, but this is the work of, I think, a tremendous group working together to bring this this budget forward. So I have an agenda here. There is a lot to the presentation. There's obviously a lot to the capital budget. Just remind us all as we go through the budget process. Sometimes we do have to make estimates, and we've tried to identify them as we go through the budget. At the end of the day, some of those estimates will vary, and as they vary, we always bring those back to council to identify those. The recommendation was read by the mayor already, and we've just restated it here in the presentation. And I think this is the slide that, being last year my first budget process with this council, was a very important slide to council. So maybe we'll start here. The levy budget, if we were to approve the budget as presented to you today, the levy would go up 1.1% on the blended tax rate. Now, what I want to point out to everybody is historically, we always used to do this calculation based on residences that weren't on water. So we actually excluded some of the residential properties. This year, based on feedback received in last year's budget, we've done the average for all residential properties. So the average property value for all residential properties in the city of Port Colborne is $207,501. And just to remind everybody that that average isn't today's dollar. That average was set by MPAC when they last did the assessment back in 2016. And we are still using the same assessment. We are waiting from the province and MPAC to determine when they may update the assessment values. At the present time, we don't have a date. We thought that it was going to be in 2021, and then we thought in 2022. But presently, we don't have a confirmed date. When we look at the rate budget, if we were to follow through with this, the rate budget would be 2.2% increase, approximately $13 to the average house using 150 M3 of water. On the wastewater side, it would be 1.9% or $19 on an annual basis. And those that have the storm sewer charge, they'd be looking at approximately an $8 increase. Now we do have an asterisk there, and there is a report coming, which we plan to do October, which will talk about revising and shrinking the storm sewer boundary. When we do that, there will be some houses that may be in position to receive a refund. So when we've done our forecasts of where those reserves are, and we can talk about those as we go through tonight, we have taken that into account, that there may be some that will have to receive a refund. So our Director of Public Works will be presenting that. And I believe we're trying to bring that out in October, and if not, it'd be early November. So that way council can look at that new boundary, consider it, and if approved, we hope that it may satisfy some of the comments that we've had with respect to the current boundary going forward. But we have taken that into account as we move forward. The other item, just on storm sewer, as we do this estimate, and to let council know, when we bring forward the storm sewer, the full budget for the operations, and we finally set the rate later this year, our goal is, or we'd like to advise council, that we'd be anticipating some shift. I know council last year brought up the fact that they were kind of surprised that a residential property maybe paid about $115, and some large commercial properties only paid $230 for the storm sewer fee. We are looking at that as a potential adjustment that may change the ratios. And we just give council the heads up that when we did the calculation of the $8, we took that into account, and we can have that fulsome conversation when we do the full rate setting budget in the November and December time period as planned. As we go through the budget, staff has put a lot of effort into it, and we thought we might want to, before we get into some of the details of how we got here, we thought we might want to highlight a couple key areas. One is, when we started this budget, we really took this emphasis that we were trying to continue to connect the city. We know we're coming out of COVID, and we've all had to spend a lot of time maybe not connected as much as we want. And when we looked at the projects that were being put forward and brought forward by people within the community, had suggested them, as well as councilors, you can start to see how much the city is being connected. I think we've been very fortunate, and staff have done a good job going after a number of grants. And as we go through, this was just one example of how we're able to connect the city. And this budget proposes almost $3.3 million in projects to connect the city, with 94% of it being funded by grants and non-levy sources going forward. A couple key highlights too as we go through the budget, connecting the city kind of from a different perspective, not necessarily from the park perspective, but looking at it from a roads perspective. $1 million we'd be proposing to increase the roads budget by 20%, as well as the sidewalk budget by 20%. And we do know that there are a number of fleet vehicles, and just like last year, I'm going to have a number of stop points throughout the presentation. Please, council, feel free to put up your hand, and we can stop it at any point in time. But as we go through the later slides, we'll go through each section individually, and we can talk about the projects that you may wish to speak about. The other project I think it's important to point out is this budget includes $7.2 million of water, wastewater, and storm sewer projects. And that's in addition to the leadership the council took just about a week or two ago, when Erie Street water project was approved for $1.88 million. And another, I think, important point that we often get asked is, where is our debt currently? This budget doesn't propose any new debt. So we'd actually be proposing in the 2022 year to be paying down our debt by $1.42 million to $27.4 million. And I have another slide just to show you pictorially what that looks like. And then just a couple other things before we set up and get into some of the details of the presentation or of the night with respect to the capital budget. I think it's important just to know the backdrop that we're operating under. Everybody has heard a lot, I think, about inflation in the last couple of months. The Industrial Product Price Index, which includes everything from concrete right through to some of the machinery that we may have to purchase. Stats Canada actually shows that up 15% over the last year. And the consumer price index is up 3.7%. So it is kind of, I think it's important that we understand the inflationary environment, because those inflationary costs, while they impact our citizens, they're also impacting the cost of running the city on a go-forward basis. Another area, just to understand the environment when we were putting together this budget, and I think kudos to the work of the strategic planning and economic and tourism teams. They've had a number of conversations, and still, being a little new to the city, I think I understand that there's been a lot of talk about growth for a lot of years, and that growth has come in different stages. Right now, there seems to be a very interested group of developers looking, and if those developments were to come to fruition, it would be almost 3,000 units. And if you just did 2.5 people per household, that'd be over 8,000 residents. And I guess you consider that right now, we have about 6,000 water bills that we send out. That would be a 50% increase and have a significant opportunity, I think, to improve the water wastewater billing scenario within the city. On the residential side, I think the last statistics show somewhere around 19 to 20,000. So the 8,000, just as an illustrative example, is a significant number. In addition to those, there's even, I guess, further down the road, other developments that have been brought forward. It could be another 1,585 units. And I think we just bring this up because some of the projects that we're proposing here is about planning for the future. If this development was to happen, I think it's important to look at secondary plans for the city and how that development will integrate into the current city, as well as development charges and how those help accentuate and pay for themselves where growth can pay for growth. So just a couple more slides, and then maybe I'll take that pause to see if there's any questions. The process for doing the budget, just a reminder, we did come to council and suggest these dates for going forward. We are on track on the capital budget, and I do thank staff, and to let council know, all the departments have submitted their levy budget requests. So we're going through those now, and we look forward to having a meeting across senior leadership by October 7th to iron out some of those. The goal is to finalize the capital budget potentially tonight. And if council decides that it needs more time, we can do more time and we can adjust the budget schedule. On the levy side, our goal is still to be done by November 8th. And on the rate side, our goal would be done by the council meeting on December 13th. I think it just goes without saying, and I hope that council was able to see that when we put together the budget and Appendix 2, we tried to identify how each of the projects might fit into our mission, vision, and values, as well as our corporate priorities. And council, I think it's important to understand, and I think for staff to thank them, when they were putting this together, they really tried to take to heart the mission that we were putting forward, that we really want to be that exceptional small town, small city experience, but do it in a big way and do it really professionally and do it that people want to partake in our city. And just a reminder on our corporate values, it's really to try to get things to be service, to concentrate on service and keep things simple, to really attract business and tourism to the city to support our city, to do citywide investments in recreational and cultural spaces. And I think this budget is really big on that. Value is always important in what we do. People is important in what we do. And thinking forward to governance is important in what we do. And the last slide, I guess, before a pause, is just the process that we went through in developing this. Again, the mission, vision, values, strategic pillars. We looked at connecting the community, which we thought was very important and we heard was very important coming out of COVID. We also know that coming out of COVID, we need to continue to be a stronger community. And that, when I say continuing out of COVID, COVID does not seem to be going away. Planning and building for growth, and also looking to make sure we have the organizational capacity to achieve these projects. And I do have a slide later on in Appendix 3 of this budget does show where we are with the 2021 prior capital budgets. And also ensure that we have organizational financial flexibility to be able to adapt to new projects that may come forward. And that's one reason why I think staff is very proud that we were able to put this together without requesting or without any new debt. So that was a lot of slides before we get into some of the details, some of the projects. Perhaps I ask council if there's any questions on those first couple slides.
Councilor Bruno?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is more of an opening comment to what we've received, Mr. Bowles. I have to tell you, I've been through now 16 or 17 city budgets and a bunch of corporate budgets. And by far, this should become the Bible. I'm so thoroughly impressed with this. I have to stop to tell you, I mean, I've never seen in like 4 or 5 pages this top line, which talks about where we are, what is grant, what is the total, what is the reserves, what is already approved, how we're internally financing it, which is undone from last year. And then the rest of that second document that you've gotten each department to lay out on one page in one paragraph what their project is that I could look up. I mean, that to me says it all. I want to pick the project, find the page, read one paragraph, see where the money's coming from and the projected timelines. I can't think of anything that right now that this document lasts. And I hope that whether you're with us or not through the years, this should become the baseline. And so that we now will have councils that can look at year over year, see what wasn't spent, where we're at, and particularly have a very elevator speech on what each project is. So I just wanted to say thank you very much. And this is probably the easiest budget I've ever had to follow. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, Mr. Bowles, continue.
Thank you to the mayor. Thank you, Councillor and Council. Again, I just highlight, when I click the share button to keep the presentation going. This is a tremendous amount of work by a lot of individuals, and special thank you to our clerk, Amber, for comments and bringing us to the format, and our Director of Public Works and others that know how to keep, I think, important information brief, because everybody's experienced me and I can certainly talk. So our next couple of slides, comparison of property taxes. I think it's important as we go through here, just for our residents and for council, just to know where we sit. City of Port Colborne on our CVA, which is our assessment value. How much is Niagara Region, the city, and education? On the total basis, we are lower on a city basis. We are maybe higher than our average. And to some councillors that have asked before about the medians, we were able to get the median after some conversation with the region, and that was very supportive as well to know where that sits. On a city basis, we are a little bit higher, although again in total we're lower, and that really comes down to some things around service levels that we have. We do a tremendous job with our downtown, I think, in the cleaning up. I've learned in the last year that we pick up garbage, and a lot of garbage cans 6 times a day at times. And that's something that other cities don't necessarily have in their model. So that's not the reason why there's the difference, but sometimes it is a service level decisions within cities. The next item is comparison of property taxes. I thought this was important as well to share. So this is where people get, municipalities get their funds. So when you look at LAMs, and again, LAMs means local area municipalities, in general, they get 80% of their property taxes from residential, and we get 77.8. And then I've provided the commercial, industrial, and then other. And there are pipelines and other things like that that we do get funding for. And we did use the 2019 FIR figures because all of the 2020s are still not in, just from a timing perspective and reporting times. But these don't change significantly year to year between municipalities. The chart that probably has a lot of conversations going on around here is water and wastewater rates. In this chart, I have tried to show the LAMs, the city of Port Colborne, and then what the next closest is based on 150 cubic meters. You can see on the water, we're pretty close. On the wastewater, it's significantly different. And I remind council that 72% of this cost, or that $1,000, goes directly to the Niagara region for cleaning. The volume being cleaned is at a volume of 2.8 M3s per 1 M3 or meters cubed of water billed. And I think we talked at last year's during budget process, we talked about almost 84% of the wastewater bill has nothing to do with what a resident actually uses in their home. It's everything to do with inflow and infiltration. Having said that, it's kind of hard to see on the screen but I suspect people may have put up their hands and would like to talk about either property taxes or water, wastewater at this point in time. So, Mr. Mayor, if I could pass it over to you so we can answer some questions.
Great, thank you. I have Councillor Wells.
Sorry about that. I was getting confused with my screen here. If I could just ask Brian to go back to the comparison property tax slide, the first one. Port Colborne has the $207,000 one, and the other average local areas have $300,000. What would the property taxes be, or how would that look like if they were all the same CVA number?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, so if we had the same value, the same CVA as another municipality, our taxes wouldn't be any different. And I know, I guess through the mayor to council, that sounds surprising, but I think it's important to remember that to calculate the amount of taxes a house pays, you take the total budget divided by the total CVA. So if you changed everybody's CVA by 30%, you don't change the total budget dollars. You're just changing your base figure that you're dividing it by to calculate the tax rate. So as long as everybody goes up to the 300,671 in the city of Port Colborne, the city of Port Colborne tax amount won't change.
I think the question, Brian, was the fact that would the $1,929 that is the city portion, would that change?
That's correct. The $1,929 wouldn't change if everybody's property value in the city of Port Colborne increased by, let's say, 30% from 200 to 300. No, like you wouldn't pay more taxes.
Councilor?
And that's where I'm just trying to get the perception here. A person in another new municipality is paying less money for a higher value home than we are in Port Colborne, a higher value by about $100,000. Yet if we go up to the same value, our tax rate doesn't change. I'm just trying to get the perception there, or get the understanding of how that really works, and how we compare at being $1,900 versus $1,600, even though we're at $100,000 less in a house value. It just makes that difference seem even more so.
So through the mayor to council, I think it's important to realize that if the tax rate would change. If you increased everybody's property value by 30%, the tax rate would come down by 30%. So that's where your number doesn't change, because when you pay your income taxes, the provincial and federal government set a tax rate. And you pay, the more money you make, the more taxes you pay, because that tax rate never changes. But in the municipal world, the tax rate changes every year, because every year you calculate the budget divided by the assessment value.
Counselor?
Okay, maybe Brian and I can hook up a little later, and we can chat this one out a little bit more. Again, I still see that a person with a higher value property paying less in other municipalities versus Port Colborne by that drawing. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Baggio?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Director Bowles. So somebody on Renfield, or actually maybe the CAO, pretty soon, he'll be paying $10,000 a year in taxes. For myself, I'm paying, say, $3,500 in taxes. So where's the equilibrium going to occur eventually?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to council, I think if the question is, someone has a house that's worth X amount that was valued in 2016, and somebody's building a brand new house that's very similar to that house, but because they're building it now, it might be valued at a higher value because of their current construction cost. And will those two houses ever come to the same tax value? MPAC will tell you over time they will, because they'll reassess everybody at the next assessment. And that's when we started the presentation, I did identify, and I will again, that MPAC was supposed to, and has historically for the last number of cycles, done a reassessment every 4 years. But as we were going into the COVID pandemic, that there was a decision by MPAC in the province not to do the reassessment, and that's been delayed. And we do look forward to knowing when that reassessment will be. So that way, those houses that were valued in 2016 might be reassessed in a similar manner to what a new house that is being built today that may be of a similar type of house. To the mayor, to council, I don't know if that helps or makes any sense. I have committed to the CAO and the mayor that we will work to bring MPAC in at the beginning of 2022. They do have a changeover in their staffing, and I'd like the new staff to meet council. So we were looking at bringing them in early in January or February of 2022 to help answer questions like this.
Counselor?
Thank you very much, Director Bowles and the Mayor.
So just a little step further, Counselor. I was looking at some real estate sales, or not sales, but houses for sale the other day on the Niagara Realtor site. There's a house that's on the market for $575,000, and it said in the ad its taxes were $3,800. So I went to the Niagara Region's tax calculation site, and that house is assessed at around $278,000. So that person is paying $278,000, yet they want $575,000 in today's market. So when Director Bowles says somebody on, or you mentioned somebody on Renfield or the CAO who's building a new house on Clarence Street, their taxes are going to be based on that 600,000 and change value. So really they are subsidizing a lot of houses. And so whether you live on Kent Street or Bell Street or Clark Street or Linwood Avenue, a lot of people have houses that are based on today's real estate market are very undervalued on what they should be paying in taxes. So, I do get people that call my office and say, I went on the real estate site and, if I was in Niagara-on-the-Lake, I would only, I'd pay a lot less in taxes. And I'd say to them, well, no, you wouldn't, because look under the real estate. If you found a similar house in Niagara-on-the-Lake, you're being assessed at around $250,000, $300,000 in Port Colborne. That house in Niagara-on-the-Lake is being assessed at around $600,000 or $700,000. So you got to calculate it on apples to apples. So all of a sudden, if you do that, the taxes are almost pretty identical to what Port Colborne is. So it is a crazy system that's out there, in the fact that houses have far surpassed their assessed value for what people are selling them for. And I'll be quite blunt. My son bought a house 3 doors down from you, Councillor Bagu, paid $430,000 for it. Its assessed value, $135,000. I mean, where's the fair? If you think about it, where's the fairness in that? Is the fact that that house should be valued a lot more than what it is, but that's traditionally what that house was valued at. So there has to be a point where everything catches up. But I think what we're trying to get out of one question from Councillor Wells is all of a sudden. So if everybody today was assessed at what they should be, taxes wouldn't climb, if at all, for most people, because you're at the proper assessment, and then all of a sudden you don't have new homes subsidizing older homes that are similar value and similar size. So it is a quirky system, and I know different governments have tried to change it, but whatever the best system is, I don't think we've seen it yet. So questions. I had Councillor Bodner had a question. I think his hand was up. Councillor Bodner.
No, you kind of touched on it, Mr. Mayor, so I'll leave it go for now.
Thanks. You. Okay, let's see no further questions. Mr. Bowles, keep going. Turn your mic on, Brian.
That was great. It was like somebody forced the unmute button. It showed up in the middle of my screen just in time. So apologize to council. Comparison of revenue and expenses. So this is kind of how our revenue and expenses compares to the other local area municipalities. On a property tax basis, we did get a little bit more of our revenue on a grants and from a user fee basis. I do think that the 2019 FIRs are difficult to compare Port Colborne and that against, because there were a couple municipalities that had some significant asset sales. So it kind of skewed their other portions. So if you do remember looking at last year's numbers, our grants and property taxes were actually, well, our grants remained higher, but our property taxes were a little bit lower than other LAMs. But I do think that's because of some of the municipalities had some one-time asset sales impacting the calculations here. So when you also look at the expense side, everybody's pretty consistent. Our environmental costs, which really breaks down to water, wastewater, are higher. And we've had these conversations before where the cost for us to purchase and clean wastewater is significantly higher. And on a percentage basis, that is kind of an outlier for us. The debt outlook, I had mentioned that we have an illustrative example. So our debt is going down by about 1.4 million in next year, and then that kind of continues to decline by over $1 million. Our annual repayment forecast at the end of 2021 is 6.5%. We do have a self-imposed ARL limit of 15%. The local area municipalities, their average is 4.9%. So we're all very close in how we've issued the debt, and we're well under our self-imposed caps. And just a reminder to everybody, the ARL is really a calculation of how much of your own source revenue, how much of our revenue is actually going to service debt payments. So about 6%, 6.5% of our revenue that we collect from property taxes and water, wastewater is going to service debt payments. And then I think it's important just to look at the reserve outlook. I know there's a lot on this slide to read at once, but I think it's important to know at the beginning of the year, we were looking at about $19 million between reserves and our work in progress for capital assets. And then we approved the 2021 budget. There were some other transfers approved during the course of the year. And we do have some forecasts because we're spending the capital budget down. We have a year-end forecast ultimately for the capital budget, as well as some adjustments because some of the 2022 capital budget is proposed to be funded through reserves. A significant portion you can see on the self-sustaining entities line. That would be the internal financing for the marina. And that's why that goes negative, because the marina's budget requests will be paid back over a number of years. Ultimately, all in all, the reserve forecast actually is only down about $300,000 from last year to next year after all of these adjustments. And just as a reminder, for the first council meeting in October, we are working on an updated T2, trimester 2, which will be the city's activity until the end of August. And then all of the divisions have forecasted information or forecasted spend out until the end of the year as they've been working on their budgets, which is going to be very helpful, I think, as we plan out our operating budget in the October-November time frame. Now, I think it's important as we go through the budget process just to take a look, and we do have legislative requirements to talk a little bit about this. So when we look at the, the legislative requirements are on 2 slides from now. This slide specifically talks about the 2021 budget and prior capital budgets. So going into the year, we had $10.4 million in approved capital. The actual spend is actually only 1.3 million roughly. The forecasted spend to the end of the year is going to be roughly 2.7, 2.8 million. And I thank Public Works for doing all of that work. There are some projects that we'll be recommending in our next report to close out for about 368,000. And you'll see in this budget, there was a comment called previously approved, and we're repurposing the dollars. So historically, the city has approved, I'm going to call it open-ended capital budgets for water, wastewater, and storm sewer, where we've said this is how much we'll spend for capital, and we'll spend up to that amount. And what we're doing here is we're actually kind of repurposing those dollars to specific projects. And on a go-forward basis, we're going to be identifying the specific projects. We think that's going to be a lot easier for council to track that there's spending going on if we actually assign those to specific projects instead of just saying we'd like X amount for capital. This way there's actually a document and there's actually a planned spend on those dollars. So once you repurpose those, the funds that haven't been spent from 2021 or haven't been allocated to a specific project remains at 3.5 million. And I'll just point out, like I looked at the numbers and all the work that Public Works has been doing. We started with 110 approved capital projects, and based on the completion of the projects, they'll complete 70 of those 110 by the end of the year. So there'll only be 40 capital projects carrying over into the next year. And the detail to get to these figures is in Appendix C. So we have every project listed out in Appendix C to this budget. So you can go and look at any project that you're interested in or want. And we intend to also republish that same document with the trimester 2, which may be another opportunity to talk about those projects to make sure they're moving forward as you like. I guess on that, if there's any questions, I can stop. If not, I can keep going.
Councillor Bruno had a question.
Thank you, Worship. Just Brian, just back to our debt outlook, and I don't know if this could be done. I'm not so sure. It's maybe your comment will be enough, or maybe there's a day you can put that to a chart. But when we look at our debt, and we look at any debt we might incur, say for future water, wastewater, stormwater, cemetery, marina, all of that stuff. Those being self-sustaining entities, while the debt is real and ultimately borne by the city, it's not all the debt that's borne by property tax. So if the marina does $1 million worth of new projects and it's borrowed money, the city ultimately, yes, is on the hook for it, but that doesn't necessarily equate to the property taxpayer being on the hook for it, because those self-sustaining entities are going to pay that debt. Is that correct?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah. Through the mayor to council, that is correct. And I can actually, maybe in the trimester 2 report, break out how the debt differentiates between levy and the ratepayers. And just a reminder for council and with the internal financing, when we do internal financing, we're effectively going to be borrowing from ourselves. So for some of these self-sustaining entities, we're recommending that we would borrow the funds against our own reserves and pay the interest back to the reserves over a period of time. So this way we don't have to have any additional external debt.
So just on that, if the marina needs $1 million, it's going to pay us back $1 million plus a interest rate?
That is correct. And that interest rate will go to support other levy projects. It obviously goes into the general levy budget, but it is helping to reduce the levy.
Thank you.
Councillor Clayla?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Bowles. I like Gary's question because I had this conversation today with a resident about the marina and trying to explain this exact fact to him, because he really felt that taxpayers' dollars were going for it. And I tried to explain the fact that, that they are self-sustaining. So some clarity, maybe, because he suggested where he could find all of this on the website. Maybe there's something that could be written up for people, because I've had many people say that to me, that the city is supporting the marina and it's not something that all the taxpayers use. Just a suggestion. I understand it very well, but trying to explain it to people and have them understand it and accept that it's the truth it is sometimes very difficult. So maybe that's something that could be highlighted, how that is being handled.
Yeah, through the mayor to council, first, definitely. And with our T2 report, I appreciate council's support. And as we've rolled out different financial reporting, I think our trimester 2, our October report that will show activity up until the end of August, will be a good mechanism to show how the marina is self-sustaining. You'll be able to see the full revenue and expense of the marina, as well as I think our new manager of finance, Adam Pijot, and Jade, our senior accounting supervisor, in all the work that they're doing on the back end with respect to the chart of accounts to make this, I think, a lot easier to show the public on a go-forward basis in a timely manner.
Okay, seeing no further questions, keep going, Mr. Bowles.
Okay, so as we move into the real crux of why we're here tonight, I thank council for letting me talk a little bit about some of the high-level activity. So our key funding sources is really property taxes, the rates for water, wastewater, and storm. We have grants, user fees, and there's also debt, which could be internal or external. And right now we don't have any external debt proposed. Something that we really don't have a lot in this budget, but our project F7 I guess that's the code, that's how we numbered the projects, identifies a development charge project, just to talk about growth, paying for growth. And I think the concept there is, as cities grow, and if we were to see some of the growth that developers have been talking to our economic development plan about, that brings with it new requirements. Sometimes you have to buy another fire truck or buy another plow to take care of the snow in the wintertime. And the importance of development charges is, if you're going to have significant development like that, it helps ensure that we do set aside dollars, so that way we have the dollars to buy that equipment, instead of relying on the current taxpayers to buy that equipment for those new subdivisions or those new areas. So it is a conversation we hope to have with council moving forward. So funding levels, and this is where we get kind of the legislative requirement, that we need to talk a little bit about how much funding we have, and then where the dollars are kind of going. An important number is the total assets. So everybody owns, a lot of people own something. So a lot of people have an asset. Some people, their asset might be a car. Some people, their asset might be a farm. Some might be a house. With the city, we have a lot of assets: roads, water mains, wastewater, storm sewer, buildings. The total value of all those is $135.8 million. That's the net book value of all of the assets. So that's after the amortization. And I just caution, because that $135 million is also calculated at when we bought it. So some of those assets we bought 50 years ago. So it costs a lot different. So in current value dollars, that number would be a lot higher in the replacement value of these assets. So when we talk about capital assets, it's important. So right now, the budget that we're proposing would have the levy contributing about $2 million, the rate, which we water, wastewater, storm, contributing 1.8, 1.9. We have recurring grants, and we have a slide about those, and debt that we currently have already approved in the budget. So the total funds available to continue to support these assets on a consistent basis right now is about $7.4 million, of which some of that is being allocated. We went through all the projects and we saw how much of that is going to kind of like new projects, 768,000. So we said, really, the amount of money we have to support asset replacement is about 6.6 million. And there was a study done before I got here in 2019 that suggested the city, and this was in 2019 dollars, not considering the inflation numbers that we talked about today, said that in 2019, the city should be spending upwards of 10.8 million a year on asset replacements, roads, water, wastewater, that. So, and this city's done a great job, I know, having joined it, to see trying to catch up and create a catch-up factor and add to the capital budget to continue to do more on the roads and the water, wastewater. But based on that analysis, just for council to be aware, the dollar figure is still about 4 million short, and that was in the 2019 figures. So there probably is still a ways to go even after this budget. And the next slide is kind of looking at it a different way. Because the city has been kind of growing its capital budget over a period of time to tackle replacement, we actually the funding available for asset replacement is actually more than what we now charge on our financial statements for amortization. And just a reminder for everybody, amortization is the accounting world. It's trying to take that net book value, the value of our assets, and it's trying to reflect that a certain amount of them kind of deteriorate over a period of time. So that's where we actually reduce the net book value every year, because we know that the value of those assets is deteriorating. And for the city, that's about $5.6 million. So that means we're actually investing more than $1 million more than the amortization. And I think that's something to be proud of, because not all cities can say that. But again, and I reiterate, amortization, just like net book value, is calculated at historical cost when you originally bought it. And the cost differential is so different, which is why if I just flip back one slide, the real number that we have to worry about is the 4 million. And that's what the city will have to grow to. And either grow its revenue sources to support, or reduce its capital assets to have to be replaced, because that is another option on the go forward basis. Now, this slide, before maybe I'll stop on this slide in a moment, is similar to what I proposed last year. You have the 2021 budget, and I know when I got here, and your former treasurer had the same model where there was a catch-up factor, and we suggested it would grow to 1.75. We suggested that the capital asset budget needs to also grow by inflation, the same thing we did last year, and that was about 2%. And that really comes down to the Bank of Canada's long-term inflation goal is 2%. Realistically, we saw that some of our costs are going up on average 15%, but 2% I think is there because there is an affordability component here. We do have some new grants, and I don't know if it's fair to call them all new grants, but the Aggregate resource grant is kind of interesting because we actually do get money through a provincial calculation based on work that's done in the quarries. And we've recognized that here and are suggesting that it would go towards our roads budget on a go forward basis. And this was actually in an earlier report, because I believe it might have been Councillor Wells that asked some questions about this, and we talked about it at council before. As well as the gas tax figure has been trued up to what the new gas tax figure that we're expecting to get. A couple other things, there is a timing difference, like it's only going to take place in 2022 and for a little bit in 2023, where we were getting funding to pay for the debt payment on the Vail Health and Wellness Center. And I guess it was all matched up pretty well, but we started getting the payments before we started paying the debt. So 10 years ago, we kind of recorded some revenue, and now we have an extra year, a year and a half to pay some of the debt on that building. So what we've recommended is we'll just reduce the capital levy this year, and we'll be able to increase it once that debt is paid off in another year and a half. And then I think the last big thing is the transfer to operating budget. The 530, people might be saying, well, what's the 530? That actually ties directly into Appendix K in last year's budget. So that was the roads prevention maintenance and the sidewalk maintenance budgets. Last year, when we were building the budget, we identified that this maybe should be moving over to the operating budgets. It covers everything from some street lights or pothole and crack sealing repairs, right through to some of the sidewalk rebalancing. So these are really things that can be viewed as operating. And now that the public works team is starting to get staffed up and having good conversations with them, it makes more sense, I think, to reflect that just in the operating budget instead of reflecting it here in the capital budget. So by and large, this is kind of how we got to the funding envelopes to talk about what was affordable. I think the important point, because I know there's a lot there and we're happy to have conversations about it, the net is the earlier slides we showed. It's a 1% increase on the blended rate to a taxpayer on a property, and we're looking at between 1.9 and 2% for water wastewater going forward. I know that's a tough slide to talk about. I don't know if there's any questions about these last couple slides, and then we're basically going to get into on a project by project basis to talk about the projects.
Okay, I have Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. I'll combine two questions that I had in one and eliminate one on the particular projects. What I found interesting about the last couple slides is we always try and look at perhaps the straight line or more traditional way of funding the infrastructure deficit. And just to the point about sidewalks, I was concerned that we have a mammoth amount of deficit on sidewalk repair. So we look at that and we're trying to grow, as we are tonight, a little bit more money spent on sidewalks. But the reality is I believe Mr. Bowles has correctly put that maintenance of pumping up sidewalks and grinding in that from capital into operating. I would suggest that even the capital sidewalk, the 150 now, I'm not going to belabor the point or argue it tonight, is really nothing more than repair. When you go around the city and take a broken slab out or two slabs out, in my mind, you're still repairing that existing sidewalk. And at the end of the day, there is no money really set aside to do new sidewalks. I find it interesting that in this asset replacement, I think we should look at some decommissioning that's practical. So the best example I have is we have new developers come into the city and they build the beautiful wider sidewalks, and we mandate that they put them on one side of the road. The last 3 years, we put sidewalks where they were not put on Clarence Street and Stanley Street, and we put them on one side of the road. You look at our total assets of sidewalks, and there's many sidewalks that we're repairing that we are subject to liability when people trip and fall. And they're older neighborhoods. Look at the end of the sidewalk and you see Chester Johnson's name, 1958, 1947. That was what they did back then. And I'm not disparaging the why now, 60 years later. But realistically, I think there's probably 20 to 25% of those sidewalks that if they were in low traffic, internal streets, older sections of Port Colborne, do they really need to be on both sides of the street? Because we're only kidding ourselves because we don't fix them fast enough. And we just patch them and get through. I mean, I'm looking at Erie Street. When we do this water line in, there's one block of those 6 that has a sidewalk on one side of the street to nowhere. It doesn't connect to another sidewalk on that side of the street, and it doesn't connect to a side street that crosses Erie. So why is it there being repaired, have trip hazards, cause us liability? And so I'd like to, in the next 1 or 2 council meetings, ask staff to look at the whole sidewalk deficit in Port Colborne. And my colleagues, really, the new wave is walkable cities. And so let's make them walkable. Instead of puttering around with, 2 and 3 slabs on both sides of the street, when we probably could start getting at, connecting the one block that doesn't have a sidewalk in it to a block that does, and make it, and I think probably be pretty popular with 25% of the people who now don't have to shovel in front of their sidewalk or have an apron issue with their, I just think we need to start looking at our asset management is how do we get the number down without necessarily spending millions of dollars? And so I don't know, Mr. Bowles, if you could comment on this whole sidewalk issue, and is there room for decommissioning some capital assets that we have in order to reduce that deficit?
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to the councillor and council, it would be my recommendation as Public Works and the whole city work together on the infrastructure needs review is it's not just about replacing, it's also about bring back to council recommendations to decommission certain assets. That decommissioning assets can have a big impact on the tax base to reduce future liabilities or future things we have to fund. And I think it's a great idea that the councillor brings up. And from a staff perspective, I think staff would be happy to take that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. If I could just add one more thing, Mr. Mayor, what I'm not saying and I emphasize not, is that every street in Port Colborne only has a sidewalk on one side. I mean, surely we wouldn't do that on Clarence Street. I don't think we would do it on large arterial roads like, King, Kalali, Elm, those kind of streets that go end to end with multiple crossings. So this is not about reducing the amount of sidewalks to 50%. It is about just doing selective, smart management of those that aren't necessary. So again, that's why the number is not 50%. It might only be 20%, but 20% of 5 million in sidewalks, let's have some of that and reduce our deficit. So thank you, Mr. Bowles. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. And may I suggest that you contact Mr. Kalamoto between now and the next council meeting, and so that he's ready to bring a fulsome answer to that question and how we would move forward, so he and his staff can put something together for you, if that's okay, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Director Bowles. This, in reference to what Councillor Bruno was referring to as a repair cost versus a capital cost, is there anything in the accounting world or where there is a limit that is set as to either a dollar value or a life expectancy when one can identify a repair versus being just a maintenance repair versus a repair being a capital repair?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to councillor and to council, there is, it normally comes down to it does come down to the expectation of extending the useful life of the asset. So if you are extending the useful life of an asset, you would normally, under normal circumstances, be capitalizing the asset. So that's where, in most cases where work is going on and we are extending and a fix is being happened, there often is, even in the operating side, there often is some discussion that happens. Did that actually extend that stretch of sidewalk or that area of sidewalk? And those costs sometimes are capitalized. And this exists with other expenses that we have in the operating budget already. Sometimes an operating repair, once we get to the end of the year and we look at what happened to the asset, was the asset life extended? We sometimes still capitalize items that we budget in the operating budget. The same is on the capital side, because sometimes when you're in the capital side, there are some planning documents, that's what we call the capital and related project budget, where we might not capitalize any of that work, and we might end up expensing it in the operating side of the GAAP statements, and GAAP referring to generally accepted auditing principles. So I guess I just would like to highlight to council that it's kind of like there you have an envelope for capital, and for the most part your capital projects are trying to drive your betterment and help the extending life of an asset, and they're bigger dollar items. And your operating budget's a different envelope, and for the most part those are those quick repairs that aren't really extending your useful life, and for the most part are small dollars. I don't know if that added any clarity or if that just added more questions.
Councillor?
No, that was very clear, Director Bowles. Just one further addition to that. Is there any benefit going the expense route rather than the capital route?
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to the council and council, there definitely can be a benefit on the expense route. A lot of individuals in the municipal world will argue that most of these assets are only expenses, because when you buy a road, they just keep costing you money to fix. They never stop. It's not like a house that hopefully you buy and it appreciates over time. So there definitely can be, I guess, a benefit from the accounting perspective, because you expense it and it's done. one of the benefits of leaving the major projects under the capital side is it does help us integrate better with speaking the engineering discussions with our director and friends in public works, where they track these assets in a GIS system that actually shows where they are and when they were replaced. And when we do that, we can attach how much money they spent on those repairs. So for the most part, like my recommendation would be to continue to keep the large projects in the capital budget and allow public works these smaller dollars to be able to do these one-off little fixes that don't have a significant extension of the asset's life.
Councillor?
Thank you. That answers it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baggio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To you, to Director Bull, just one question about capital assets. Would vacant city property have a value put on it and added to our capital assets, or is that something totally different?
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to the councilor and council, that's actually a great question. So there was a time, and some of you may remember, that there were no capital assets on the balance sheet of a city. And, it was interesting back in the 2000s, that's when they were the work was being done to bring them on. So, and a value was assigned to every piece of property that the city had. So every property that the city has some value assigned to it. In that net book value figure that I identified to council, that's about $130 million. So we do have a record of every property. Now, having said that, the caveat is the city is old, and some properties were obtained a long time ago. So some properties may be on record as $1 because the property dates back in such a period of time that a nominal figure was put on it when they were capitalized because an adequate figure couldn't be identified. So it's a very interesting question, but yes, we do have a record of every property. And if the city was to, for example, sell a property, we would have to remove that from our assets. And we would have to potentially record either a gain or a loss, depending on what the value of that property is on our books.
Councillor?
Yeah, I'm good, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne, is your hand up again, or is that the same hand that was up before?
Sorry, Your Worship. Thanks.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bowles, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going back to share my screen. So now as we've kind of gone through the introduction, now we go into the projects themselves. And this was just a summary slide, and it's included. I know it's not easy probably to read on screen. It's included in the appendix and in the printout material. In total, there's about $23 million in proposed funding in this budget, of which $2 million comes from the levy, about $1.9 million from rate, and the rest is from grants or other revenue sources within the city. I think important just to identify is, you'll see there's no transfer to the capital levy. Last year, we did have a reserve transfer that we had as a contingency fund. And this year, that contingency fund, and I'm just grabbing my book here, it was in the beginning of the appendix. This year, that appendix, or that contingency fund, I think is unspent in the amount of around just over $100,000. So for all intents and purposes, staff haven't proposed a contingency fund, but we still maintain a contingency fund in case there's an over or short, or council may decide to do something else during the course of the year. And I know, and I suspect councilors probably have different viewpoints of putting funds away in the water, wastewater reserves. going into the year, the water and wastewater reserves, if you recall, we had conversations and we did fund Erie Street out of them. We're worked down to almost zero. So having these dollars in the reserve will allow, as Public Works continues to investigate and work on projects and bring them back, they'll allow them during the course of the year to bring back new capital projects to council to consider as we continue to work on the water and wastewater model or infrastructure to help reduce costs going forward. So having provided those comments, I've tried to break out the budget in each component, and my plan here is on each slide we would stop and councillors could ask questions or make comments on their on projects. So the first area here is facilities, and I think the highlight in the facilities budget is because of various grants that staff have applied for at different times, as well as certain dollars that were set aside for some of these projects. Almost 93% of these of the total project or the total cost of these projects put forward is grant or other funded. And I just thought that was an important point to highlight to the council. And the other point that I just highlight is the other like TBD, like full disclosure, that relates to the waterfront center. And we tried to put some notes even on this appendix for council that there is work going on right now to look at other grants, sponsorships, how the assessments may change or growth opportunities in that area, as well as user fees, leases, etc., around to be able to support and even potentially certain land sales to make that possible. So that way the levy doesn't have to bear the cost of that. Having said that, perhaps Mayor, if you can, if there's any questions, staff is here, and I thank staff again for being here during this section to be able to answer specific questions on these projects.
Thank you, Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. Two, one kind of relates to this to the slide prior, but it does dovetail into facilities and everything else. Through you to Mr. Bowles. Mr. Bowles, I know in a lot of communities, ourselves is included, and senior staff have addressed this by bringing in some additional help. But I think it's often difficult for us to look at funding future projects for the year when there are, and just I only counted the number of lines in the previous slide that had a dollar figure still unspent, and it's unfair to say that those seven, some of the unspent may be that the project's finished and there was $4,000 left. But where I'm going with this, is it the, and later in these slides, you mentioned about having the flexibility to go ahead with staff to begin work on some of these badly needed ones or start the process, which I have no objection to. But what I am concerned about is, do the 7 lines that I saw in the previous slide, will there be a mechanism where the senior staff says, look, we need to get those projects finished. You can start a couple of the new ones. I guess what I don't want to do is sort of green light new projects and leave the ones that aren't finished languishing. I'm sure there are some reasons for matching funding or things that are coming through or shortages, but I just want to know if you can address the cleanup of money unspent and projects uncompleted. And I have one more question.
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councillor and council, I think it's a fair question. And I think that's where I think the councillor is referring to Appendix C. And Appendix C identifies that there's still $3.5 million at the city that's outstanding, that's projected to be outstanding for projects come the end of the year. And will we be able to continue to move forward with the new projects? And I guess I'll identify a couple things. And I think in the presentation that Director of Public Works put forward was when we each had the opportunity to talk about our departments is there's been a major changeover in public works, and that major changeover did put some things on pause, and we have had to push some projects to the new year. And maybe I not to speak for the director of public works, maybe he wants to come and say a couple comments on this, but I'm going to suggest that we're running on all cylinders, or pretty close to all cylinders, and it's time to keep it going, because the projects from last year are going to get dwindled down, as well as these projects that we're going forward in 2022. I see my colleagues come on, and maybe he'll say a couple words and either correct me or keep it going.
Mr. Calamoto.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council, specifically Councilor Bruno. Thank you. We understand that there's been history of some of the projects not being completed. As the director noted, 70 out of 110 projects are on the go and have started. With what you see before you, 75% of those dollar figures is for one particular project. So it's actually just 25% of the rest of those makes up of those costs, make up the rest of those projects. Even within those 25%, 2 of them are actually requested for additional money to continue with some other projects. So there are some ongoing ones, which we will continue to do. We just are requesting some more money now that we have some more details within the design. The previous budget number wasn't enough, and therefore we have come back and asked for some of those. But again, those are ongoing projects. So it is actually fewer than one might see with regard to the dollar figure and with regard to the number of projects that are actually new. With regard to some of the changes that we've made within Public Works, although we still do not have a manager of engineering, we have brought on some help with the support of the CAO and the director and treasurer, that we do have some now assistance with regard to procurement. There are also some additional procurement efficiencies that we are going to be putting forward to council to get some things done more quickly. And we have some technical help provided to us that will speed up things for the second half of this year and into next year.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Kawamoto. Thank you, Director Bowles.
Great, thanks. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the discussions I've had with Director Bowles, and I included on one of my response back to the capital budget, was the identification of a priority for each of the projects that we're working on. And that priority basically would be set such that the interest in getting those projects done prior to even moving on to some that would be somewhat questionable and where they fall into the priority mixture. But I think that something like a priority listing of the projects would help us focus on the ones that need to be done essentially. And then if there are some that we don't get to, they would be further down on the list that we would have time in order to get those done. So I did introduce that to Director Bowles, and we've been talking about that. And it's just a concept that I think has some merit in where we award capital monies, where we what we get onto first, how fast we get them done, and where we can put our focus on.
Okay, Mr. Bowles, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, just to the mayor, to the councillor and council. Yeah, Councillor Wells did provide that today, and that in our conversations previously about the prioritization model, and that is something that we as staff are happy to continue to look at going forward. I think one thing for council to consider is the prioritization model might dictate which projects are being worked on first versus second and third. The projects that are put forward in this capital budget are projects that staff are putting forward at the advice of either councillors the community or information that we have based on conditions of certain assets to move certain things forward. And the projects that we put forward are projects that staff do believe need to be done, and we've tried to identify the timeframes within that these projects will be done within the capital sheets. But that said, adjusting this process to include priority rankings is something that we'd be happy to look at and build into future budgets to help council have another mechanism to assess project importance.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you. I just wanted to bring that up just as a point of interest. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Mr. Bowles, continue.
So I don't know if there's any other questions on the facilities slide. I still see hands up. Are the hands? No.
Councillor Baggy didn't have his hand up before. Councillor Baggy, you had a question?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just one question. A question to Director Kalamoto about the Vail Center roof. This, I know the repair is not included in this budget. I got no idea. We talking $100,000 or $1 million in repairs, but I just like a little bit more clarity on what the problem with the roof is in the Vail Center that we need to spend that amount of money on a engineering study, or is it just a re-engineer part of the roof?
Mr. Kalamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe I can touch base at a high level with regard to this, and then our our facilities maintenance supervisor can jump in with any specific comments that he may have. But with respect to this, it is my understanding that in the past history, there have been some budgets requested because of the leaking of the roof. Right now, we have in place some of those monies being utilized to do a trade, basically to stop the water from actually getting onto the ground and causing the floor to prematurely degrade. What we're looking for is some additional money for the actual complete fix. So right now we have enough for a Band-Aid, enough to get us through, enough to stop the degradation of some of that asset. But what we're looking for is a permanent fix. And this permanent fix will take some additional investigative works. It will take some additional review, design, and then ultimately construction. So that's kind of what the additional money is that we're asking for here. As mentioned before, this is an addition to the previous project. Again, noting that we did not have enough money for that permanent fix. This is why we're asking for it at this time. I'm not sure if the supervisor has anything additional to say, or if there are any other specific questions related to that he may be able to answer.
Mr. Thomas?
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Mr. Kalamoto summarized it, like you said, at a high level. We've been dealing with that particular issue at the Vail Center for a better part of probably 8 years before my time. It's my belief that we've done what we can with the money that's been available. Obviously, it's still an ongoing issue. And I feel it's an irresponsible use of tax dollars to continue to Band-Aid fix this. I believe that we need someone with the expertise and the knowledge and experience with this type of a roof to come in and say, this is the issue, this is why it still continues to leak, and this is the direction that you should take. And then in 2023, we can revisit the actual final be-all, end-all fix, whether that be panel replacement, full gutter replacement, or other. And I don't believe we have the in-house expertise, myself included, to accurately assess that definitively. And this is where this year's council ask has come for the that particular ask anyway.
Great, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Councillor?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very acceptable. Thank you. My other questions on capital request A13, which is a waterfront center. by reading this here, the summary is talking about a potential alternate funding of $4.245 million. I was under the impression it was like $2 million that we were looking at initially, when it's still in the planning stage, I know, but I really don't know what even phase one is and how many phases there are of this project. So by approving the budget tonight, that would, if I vote for it, would approve the $4.2 million, which I'm not prepared to do. So how are we going to explain that one, Director Bowles?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councilor and council, and perhaps Mr. Long will step in and explain a little bit more about the makeup of the project. But what we tried to do in the capital budget, and this was the wording also in the recommendation, that staff could move forward on any projects that had confirmed funding. So in approving the capital budget, we'd be moving forward, but staff would only have the 700,000 in grant funding, because that's the only confirmed funding. The rest of it still has to come, and we even identified, I think on the facilities slide and on the Appendix B document, that staff would be coming back with the plan for the other 4.2. Staff does not take it that we have permission to spend on the 4.2 until we have confirmed funding and have been back to council.
Councilor?
For specifics on the project, maybe Mr. Long can help me out on that.
Okay, Mr. Long?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. Through you to the councillor. Yeah, I certainly support everything that Mr. Bowles has said about next steps. We certainly want to keep council and the community informed as to the status of this project and how we move this forward. I think as council can appreciate, there's a lot to this project. There's some knowns as well as some unknowns, but there's a lot of work to be done to clean up the site. As we look ahead to construction of a new waterfront center, there's site servicing, there's landscaping, there's fencing, there's pathways and sidewalks that are required. There's some paving that will have to be done. So those are a few of the sort of major project elements to not just construct the waterfront center, but to take care of other sort of site redevelopment issues. And as Mr. Bowles has indicated, it's certainly our intention to come back to council in the very near future with a more detailed project update. And I think at that time, we will also have, I think, some updates and hopefully some good news on some other public and private funding sources. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor?
I'm good, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councilor Danch?
Hey, sorry for my no video here. I forgot my charger and I'm just watching my usage here. I think I'd like to just back up to where we were talking about the roof at the Vail Center and the money that we need to spend. I don't know if Mason's still out there or not, but this has been an ongoing problem. Maybe not budget oriented here, but we've been paying and paying and paying for these repairs. We're not getting a repair. We're not even getting a Band-Aid. I don't know if we can go back on the contractor here after all these years, and maybe this is not a council issue, but this is nonsense. I mean, I think we should be going back on Aquacon and getting those guys back here, and we can show that we've spent tons of money on this repair. And I think we should be moving forward that way and not trying to keep fixing a problem, getting a new engineer involved, because none of them seem to be able to fix this problem. But like I said, I hope I'm not out of tune there with my idea, but I'm not happy. I was there for the grand opening, and this has been going on for too long.
Mr. Thomas?
Through your worship to the council, I'm not disagreeing with you. I believe that this has been a manufacturer's defect, for lack of a better term. I think that this was done incorrectly or designed incorrectly from the get-go. Unfortunately, we are where we are, and I don't know. I've actually looked into this to some degree over the last 2 years as far as contractor responsibility. I believe we're at a stalemate in that respect because I think too much time has gone by and too many concessions have been made over the past, as you mentioned, many years. I believe we're at the point now where we've assumed responsibility for anything that is an ongoing issue. I could be wrong. We can continue to kind of investigate that or kind of go down that avenue. But long story short, I mean, we are where we are and it does still leak. And again, I'm in agreement that the Band-Aid fixes are just not viable. They're not working, and it does require some substantial remediation. How that's paid for, how that comes about, again, we can explore, we can look into that with going back to Aquacon and the initial roofing contractor. But to date, we haven't had any success.
Yeah, the original roofing contractor is no longer around. And that would be the contractor responsible. Aquacon didn't do the roof. The roofing contractor was brought in through our architect team to do the roof. So Aquacon didn't. So it's not Aquacon. Aquacon was actually on our side when we're trying to get money from the roofer originally, but the roofer has gone out of business. So.
No comment.
Well, I don't know what comment you would make, Councillor, because, I mean, you've been here all this time and it's been a continuing problem. So I think let staff move forward with what their plans are, and I think, you know, they're going to come with something pretty good back that we can actually fix it. So, but we are where we are and we've got to move forward here. So, any other further questions?
Thank you. Number 810, the sea container purchase. Like, the Valley Health and Wellness Center is a great looking building, and the outside, inside, and I just hate to see a sea container used as a storage outside. Like, I don't even know if it's a used one that we're going to paint, but I think of the people on Walnut Street that have a look across the road and see those rusty CN containers that they have to look out their front door and the front windows. I'm just wondering if we get something a little bit more aesthetic, pleasant, more pleasant to, rather than a CN container. Like, maybe not for this year or next year, or we're put it next year, but we got to keep the place looking great like it is. Like, it's a good looking complex, and I think a CN container takes away from the the value of the aesthetically.
Mr. Kawamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, a rock or a wall or a canvas is blank and ugly at the beginning. What we will do with the sea container is make it a piece of artwork, make it look nice, and make it look aesthetically pleasing, as the councillor pointed out, and make it into something that will fit with the area. The supervisor again is here to say exactly where it would be, but we're going to try to put it out of the way where it isn't highly visible, but those who do see it will see a work of art.
Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the councillor. Agreed that, yeah, sea containers, particularly used ones, are not the most aesthetic items. The idea is that we would purchase what they call a one trip, which is a fairly new container. And the idea was to put it behind the existing building at the south side of the rear parking lot where Parks keeps lawn maintenance equipment currently. There is kind of a wooded area that's been somewhat cleared for future use between other areas of Public Works and my group. The idea would be to eventually have multiple sea containers, and I say this multiple. There are buildings that take 2 sea containers, 2 of the longer units, and they put a roof on it. And you know, basically it was a two-step or a two-phase approach to this, because both departments are at a loss for additional storage. Again, it is a beautiful area back there. We don't want to degrade the aesthetics of the area, so of course that's always been at the forefront of our planning. However, step one would be to get the physical usable square footage for the storage that we need at the current.
Councillor?
The great answer is actually Director Kawamoto, the artist, the blank canvas. I guess they are making houses out of CN containers now too, right? So you gave a perfect answer, you two guys. Thank you.
Great, Councillor. Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. Going back to Councillor Baguiou's point about the facilities and the proposed projects, I had hoped that because of the vote that we had in council, that I believe was unanimous or close to it, that the waterfront center, you know, really was looked at as future funding and outside sources, tenants, that type of funding format. So I didn't know if, while it's not here now, is it fair to say, through you to Mr. Bowles, that A1 through A12 are essentially needed proposed projects?
Mr. Bowles?
And A13 is a like to proposed project. And just to round that out, I don't know if because I didn't do the math on this, but just roughly speaking, the to be determined, the 4.245 million, i.e. 93%, that is, would that be fair to say is well, obviously it's the lion's chunk of 5,681,659, but truth be known, is it really the 93% of that? In other words, A1 through A12, we have the money for, and A13 is the one that needs future funding.
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to the council and council, that is correct. A13 still needs its funding source finalized. Council did approve moving forward with the grant, and the city has been awarded the grant in the tune of, I believe it's $755,000 to get that project started. So it is included in the capital budget from the standpoint that the grant has been awarded, and council will need to approve the receipt of it to be able to move forward with the project. That being said, if council wishes to adjust or deal with it separately, I think staff can work with that as well, for all intents and purposes. So yes, the 93% also, I believe is calculated on the total figure. I'll point out that out of all the projects there, A1 through A13, only 86,000 is actually coming from the capital levy. I don't know if that helps at all, Councillor, but those are a couple comments.
Well, I guess what I'm saying that when you, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess what I'm saying that the confirmed grants, reserves, and PY Capital and Vail are sources of funding that all 12 projects, A1 through A12, could be passed this evening, and the balance is A13, which is the one that would still need future funding. Would that be a correct way of stating this?
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to the councillor, I believe so. The government grants on the slide, and maybe I'll just bring up the slide for everybody. hopefully that worked. The government grants component of $1,040,000 includes, I believe it's $750,000 for the waterfront center. So when you're thinking of the figures of 86,000 for the levy, grants of $1 million, reserves 125, prior year capital, and some savings of the 107, of those figures, it's the confirmed grants. I just want to point out that 750,000 is confirmed for the waterfront center, and the city has received that. So in some respects, some sort of project either will have to occur or those funds will have to be returned. Whether maybe I'd have to ask Mr. Long if approving it tonight impacts that grant, or because he's been, I think, having more direct conversations with that funder. I don't know if Mr. Long wants to add anything to that.
Mr. Long?
For you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, in response to Mr. Bowles' question, I think from my standpoint, it's important for council to continue to show their support for this project. Certainly, committing city dollars, or at least expressing support for city funding being involved for this project, I think is important. I think it's important for FedDev, which is an agency of the federal government, to know that there continues to be, council support for this project, and that council and staff are working together to find or to put together a financing strategy to make this happen. So, that's just my opinion, but I know in speaking with the FedDev official last week, there are timelines in which the city has to spend these dollars between now and I think March of 2023. That certainly gives all of us a lot of time to put together a project plan and other funding sources to make sure that we can move forward with this project.
Councilor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. That adds much more clarity. I guess what I would have liked to have seen, because the premise of my question was that we should be looking at funding A1 through A12 with amount of money that carves away $750,000, because that money can't be used for A1 to A12. So I would have liked to have seen a slide that says A13 next to it. First off, I'm assuming that if we go to the previous slide, that A1 through A12, or one of the slides here, or in the attachment that looks at each project, that each one of those has a dollar figure to complete A1 through A12. And so would we not be trying to show how A1 through A12 is funded, and are we going to put up our hand to approve that funding and its sources? A13 should have the 750 against it, because it is not free-flowing funds to do anything on A1 to 1213. It conditionally attaches itself to A13. So I'm just trying to look for clarity. If I want to approve A1 through A12, what funding sources do I have? How much do you need out of this year's capital budget? And for A13 to have that 750 attached to it, because it either gets spent or goes back, depending on the fulfilling the rest of the funding. So I would like to see it separated. And I'm prepared to go forward depending on what the number is for A1 through A12 and show me your proposed funding sources for just those. And I already know the funding source for A13. Currently it's 750. And yes, I understand it needs it needs matching dollars. So is there a way to do that? Because I certainly would like to get on with A1 to A12, and I'd certainly like the public and the media to know what is getting approved and what needs future funding. Now, I guess you could say that they're all proposed, but I think we're looking to do A1 through A12 or not do some of them, depending on council's vote. And A13 is more of an ongoing story. Does that make any sense, Mr. Bowles or Mr. Long?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to council. I don't know if you can see the Appendix B that I put up on the screen. And Appendix B has the total capital request for facilities. That has the 5.6 million, the same as what we had on the slide. And it shows the breakdown for projects A1 through A12. And if council was more comfortable approving A1 through A12 and either conditionally approving A13 or however you want to proceed, we as staff will take council's direction. As treasurer, I just point out that there has been an approval for some commitment to the waterfront center, which allowed for the grant for the 750.
I would be okay with that.
Mr. Bowles?
Okay, so through the mayor to maybe Councilor Bruno, just for clarity, you're proposing that council approve A1 to A12, and perhaps the clerk will help me out how to manage this at the end of the night. And an A13 be approved in principle with no approval to move forward on spending the 4.2 until another day when staff come back to council. We have in our document proposed that, but to add greater clarity to that, maybe there's a way that the clerk can help me do that if that's what council's looking for.
Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, Councillor Bruno, you can clarify if I'm not correct. I believe that you're looking for staff to come back before there is any spending of the funding allocated in A13. And if that is the case, I believe that is what is proposed, that Mr. Bowles did say that they would come back. So I guess maybe Brian can say if that is confirmed, and if not, we can add that to a motion. We can add that as an amendment.
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to council, that is confirmed, and that is what we wrote directly. I can switch back my screen on the slide that said staff would come back before moving forward. And that is also why we wrote the recommendation that staff cannot move forward with any project unless there's confirmed funding, because we wanted to make sure council was very clear that we would not move forward on this project until we confirm the funding with council.
Councillor?
I think we're sort of saying the same thing, but on A1 through 12, it can be asterisk that it does have confirmed funding if we pass the capital budget. I'm cognizant of, and I don't mind being transparent of it, that to get the 750 free, to get the 750 money from the feds, we were going to have to ante up I don't know what it was, 250. And then there would be the balance to complete that building. Both the 250 and the balance, both the 250 and the balance need to be raised by us in whatever form is deemed necessary. And I would suggest that the first 250 of it could come from future grants, rent, or council funding. But that hasn't been determined yet. And so I guess I see what Amber and Mr. Bowles you're saying. I just would like to specify that effectively, if we want to proceed with A1 through A12 and we pass this capital budget, they are then a go. Is that clear? And A13 is as proposed, but is not a go, subject to other funding. Is that fair to say?
Through the mayor to the councilor, I think that's crystal clear. I will ask the councilor and council just for clarity if that's the way they want to go. There will be some expenses in order to continue to plan out the waterfront and get maybe some pictorial drawings or things like that. If Mr. Long required and the director of public works in putting this together required some of that work to be done, is it council's opinion that they could use some of the grant? Well, that's to keep the project going while they're finalizing the business case, or would council's direction be to hold on the whole amount?
But from my point of view, you have to keep moving forward, and that part of the bigger picture, I think, is relatively small to not stymie moving forward on this project. So I would be very willing to pass it on those conditions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodner?
I kind of see where Councillor Bruno is going here. But I kind of think it already is implied and in there that you're not, staff isn't going further than the 750 or even going to do all of that without coming to council and keeping us surprised of how they're using that 750. So I don't know if we're just complicating this, or I'll let somebody with more knowledge of numbers than me come up with the right answer. But I was kind of happy with the way it was, but willing to listen.
Mr. Long?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council. We appreciate and acknowledge that we're sort of coming at this in a unique way. Typically, we'd have a bit more time to plan all of this out. I think council will recall that the program itself was announced fairly quickly at the end of June. Staff, to their credit, turned around an application very quickly. We were thankful to get council direction and council support to submit an application and to commit city funds for the project. So we've had to come at it from sort of a different angle, and we appreciate your patience on that. Certainly the 750 from the federal government, namely the FedDev agency, will get used up fairly quickly over the next 6 months to a year in terms of site redevelopment costs, retaining an architect and a construction firm to put together detailed design and drawings. So I think we're going to spend that fairly quickly, but at some point we're going to need additional capital to move forward with the construction of the new waterfront center. But I can tell council that we are bringing forward a report to the September 27th meeting about another funding opportunity with the province. And we will also be exploring another funding opportunity this fall to secure some larger capital dollars for this project. Thank you.
Councillor Bodner?
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Clayliff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Long. I guess I feel like Councillor Bodnar, I fully support what you're doing. I know how hard you've all worked on all of this. Look at it the same way. I thought it was kind of a done deal, and hopefully we can just start and move ahead. I think I'm happy with the way it was written up, and I like a couple of the other people, not Councillor Bruno. I thought that it said it very clearly in the papers when I was reading this in the report. But I also think that to not approve it at this point sends a message to we've just received the $750,000. Now we're going to turn around and say, hold it, slow down, we can't do anything more. Wait. I think that what Mr. Long and Mr. Cotton have done has been great work on all of this. I've heard great things from even within the community, different groups. I have no doubt that we're going to be able to do this, and I hope that we can see to pass this tonight, at least in principle somehow, that it could just start to move forward, and we just keep working and moving ahead on it, like I think everybody wants it to. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bowles?
Okay. I guess just for clarity for me, am I moving forward, or are we still talking about this issue?
Councillor Bruno?
Yeah.
I think I thought what Mr. Bowles' answer to my question and for Mr. Long was the ability to keep moving forward. But if A1 to A12, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that we want to tell Mason and others that those projects are ones that we want to do, and maybe here's the fly in the ointment, and we're approving the money to do them in their completion. Would that be correct?
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to council, that is correct. So A1 to A12, we're approving in their entirety. A13, you're approving only known funding sources, because that is what we put in our recommendation, and that's what we include on our slide in our report, that you're only approving where we have known funding sources.
Great. So on A13, we have one known funding source, the 750. And I assume you could even say we can't get the 750 without, from one way or the other, putting at least 250 into that, or whatever that grant proposal was, 80-20, I'm not sure what it was. And the balance would be, at this time, only funded through additional grants or additional city funds subject to approval, correct?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councilor and council, that is correct. As treasurer, I will make sure that nobody moves forward past those dollar figures until they come back to you and get approval.
That's correct.
That's now good enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, Mr. Bowles, I see it's 8:31. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, counselors, we're ready to go here in a minute. If everybody could log back on, or turn their screens back on. When I see all their faces, I'll tell you to go. Okay. You back on there, young man? Great, thanks. Okay, we're back. Mr. Bowles, continue.
Thank you, Mayor. As we continue, I'll bring up the next slide. So the next section of the budget we grouped was fleet and equipment. And again, I thank the staff of the city and my colleagues for being on here tonight. I suspect there may be some questions on some of these projects. From a financial perspective, what I'll identify is reserves are being used for a significant portion of this section, specifically when it comes to replacement of vehicles. Council, remember last year there was a block amount of money that was set aside, and I said that it was my opinion that staff shouldn't be moving forward before they start identifying specifically what vehicles were going to be required and to work out a multi-year vehicle replacement plan. And staff is working on this, and as they're building that, the vehicles that are in most need, they've identified here to today in the documents. I think B7 outlines a number of those. So dollars that have been kind of set aside in previous budgets to replace some of these larger vehicles are now potentially being released if council were to approve those. And Public Works can speak to those specifically. In addition, I guess just the other point is some of these vehicles that that Public Works has a need for or identified in the capital budget are going to take 12, 18, and potentially up to 24 months to procure, which is why when it comes to some of these fleet items, the budget actually encumbers part of the 2023 in budget as well. So approval of this is also going to approve paying for some of these in 2023 because they have to, if they move forward, they have to do the ordering now, but we may not see these vehicles until early of 2023. And I'm sure our Director of Public Works or others in that group might be able to explain more of how that works, but that backlog is real and that is what we expect. So with those comments, Mayor, if there are questions from council, we look forward to them, and thank you, colleagues, for being here to help answer them.
Okay, questions on the fleet and equipment list? I don't see anyone. Councillor Baggy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just one thank you, actually, that asphalt hot box. A couple of years ago, I observed one in Fort Erie, town of Fort Erie using it, and I watched them fill a couple of holes, and I kept an eye on them all winter long. And that hot box is a very big asset to the citizens' vehicles when they're crossing the potholes. Those filled holes, they lasted all winter, no problem, and they're still patched to this day, Mr. Mayor. So I think it's a great expense on that one to go forward on that. And I also like to thank everybody for putting the fast chargers, if it's passed, into the Market Square. I think it's high time we started, and it's a great start. And I'm looking forward to eventually changing some of our fleet to electric also as we buy new. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? Not seeing any. Mr. Bowles, continue.
Why the fuck is it in gallery?
Counselor, can you turn your mic off or mute yourself, please? Mr. Bowles, do you want to continue?
Through the mayor to council, we'll continue with the presentation. So information technology was our next section, and that became the C1 to C7 projects. One of the projects on this list, I think I have an extra slide for. Those that are helping build it out provided some additional visual images. So I'll switch to that in just a second, but just to identify a significant amount of some of these projects is being funded through grants, and some of them because we did look at, and council may remember it, prior to, I think back in 2020, there was an approval to move the IT server room to the basement. And upon looking at that, I think we found moving the server room to the basement was going to be potentially more costly than we originally had budgeted for. What we are going to be doing, and we recommend, is reducing that project scope. We can repurpose some of the money to keep some of these projects moving forward. And we'll move the server room to one smaller room on the main floor of City Hall. And as we continue to move things to the cloud, we anticipate our server room requirements to continue to decrease over time. So we do view it as a bit of a cost savings, and we can get additional projects in to improve efficiencies. And I see that our manager of IT has come on in case there's any additional questions with respect to this. So I thank you very much for that. The other slide, just to show you, and I think this is something that staff are very excited about, because much of it would be funded from the Vale Health and the Valley Community Improvement Grant, would be to bring NRBN fiber internet to the Valet Center, where we do have almost like a residential line, I'll call it, that's servicing that building and does not meet the users of the building's requirements. But we found that when we bring it there, we also have the ability to move it out into the fields to support sports tourism and to support first and foremost, the community that uses the fields, as well as some of the parks that we have. You can see in the upper picture, when we move the internet over to the marina, we would be able to light up, I guess, I don't know if that's the technical term, but we'd be able to provide internet through Wi-Fi at H.H. Knoll to our users, as well as our boaters. So this project kind of evolved over a period of time, and the potential for funding from the Valley Community Improvement Fund and looking at the marina already having to incur some cost to bring the internet there, we could take advantage and really be a leader in this area to have Wi-Fi in our community. And these Wi-Fi examples will give us an opportunity to not only communicate with our constituents, but those that come to the city from outside of the city. And that, I think, will be something very useful to be able to help us determine how people use our facilities, when they use their facilities, and why they use our facilities. So I'll just go back to the information technology slide. And if there are questions, we're happy to take any questions.
Perfect, thank you. Any councilors, any questions? I'm not seeing any. Okay.
Mayor?
Oh, Councilor Beauregard, go ahead.
Yeah, through your worship to Director Bowles, I sent a message to you earlier about interactive mapping. This was sent yesterday, and I was CC'd you, Mr. Mayor, as well as Councillor Bruno and some of the directors. And I'm just wondering whether or not the GIS online data and mapping would constitute part of that. Could you provide a little bit further explanation?
Mr. Kalamoto? I think that goes to Mr. Kalamoto, I believe.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kalamoto. I think you're muted, Chris.
My apologies. Apparently, I'm having some IT issues solely on my own cognizance here. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I believe you are specifically discussing about item C1, the GIS online and mapping data. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Well, again, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor and all of council, all of those, the GIS databases and mapping are crucial services that can be used by all departments across the corporation, implementing both the web-based functionality, and it will allow all staff to easily access data for many purposes. So even the purposes that the councillor is discussing. If the online mapping functionality was in place, each individual department could utilize and customize their own data in their own way. And this would allow for more time to maintain the data and improve delivery time, more in-depth mapping of requests, and current GIS database resources can be used. So we will be able to focus on a multitude of things that the councillor mentioned, increase both efficiencies and communications throughout the organization and toward the public too. Not sure if I answered the question appropriately, but I can maybe take anything back with some additional detail.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kawamoto. Councillor Beauregard.
Through your worship to Director Kawamoto. The part that I'm particularly focused on, and I'm happy that this system is being implemented internally. It's a great step, and it definitely needs to be done. I'm just wondering more about public access and how we can get some of that information to the public and to potential developers. And so when we have developers that are interested in our community, they can have easy access to these to know what they can do without having to necessarily go through our city department. They can just look it up online. And like I've said, there are some other municipalities out there that have these interactive mappings: Welland, Town of Lincoln, City of Niagara Falls, just to name a few. So thanks.
Mr. Kawamoto?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. As an example of what the councillor is discussing, the commemorative program, as an example, we are looking to have a map online that can be used by the residents, scroll over particular areas, and up pops and identifies the particular commemorative assets that may be appropriate for that place. So as a resident, as a user, for example, on this GIS database, they can see that in a particular area, say of a park, a particular type of bench or a particular type of tree, or maybe not a bench, but only a tree, would be acceptable in that particular place for commemorative assets. So that's an example that we can use as we use this GIS online database and mapping, and free up some of our GIS resources and timing to create those sort of things. So it is kind of a 1-2 punch, that it helps create those things, but also frees up our GIS resources as other departments use this particular GIS so that they can focus on outfacing things towards the public, as an example in that commemorative program. And I hope that's an example that the councillor is looking for, but we will be moving forward with any of those other ones that we see or are recommended to do in the future.
Councillor Beauregard?
I'm happy with the response. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. Really appreciate this report. I think the smaller the community you are, the more nimble you need to be, and we can get a lot more bang out of information technology than I think even the big guys, and it puts us on a better level playing field. Through you to Mr. Adair, I'm just wondering, one of the things in Mr. Bowles' rollout of this, particularly on the Wi-Fi, one of the things that wasn't maybe as clearly mentioned, and that is the where, and by that I mean where are they from? And without getting too big brother on this, I'm wondering about the ability to also look at places like the museum, which will have Wi-Fi, and for that matter, West Street or the downtown. In other words, is this buildable upon? Because I would like to know where people are coming from, visiting downtown, visiting all the harvest fests and the art crawls and all of those, the cruise nights and all of that. And a lot of that is in the downtown core. And my rationale is that it is only then that, besides the multiplier for tourism, that we can more accurately talk about what our expenditures, marketing are, or future spends, whether it's waterfront center, whether it's more events in the city, what real kind of bang for the buck, and the leveraging off of that, where merchants can see that data and start targeting their marketing, where the city can market in a more general sense. So could you talk about how this could pivot, and with this infrastructure, would it then be easier and possibly scalable to do downtown and other facilities that are.
Yeah, definitely. There's the infrastructure that's being implemented is very scalable in nature, whereby the initial infrastructure that gets implemented is very centric and able to be placed throughout the municipality. As Mr. Bowles indicated at the beginning, the NRBN Wi-Fi project that we were discussing really kind of built up over time, and we were looking at certain individual facilities and that sort of thing. And as we started talking about more facilities that we could bring online, for instance, the Vale Health and Wellness Center and the sports fields, HH Knoll Park, definitely bringing those on is a very simple process in doing so. And much like you had mentioned as well, a lot of the capabilities for leveraging the different data sets, where individuals are coming from, where they're traveling to, different hotspots throughout the municipality that they're visiting. We're able to gather and harvest that information and help inform, some evidence-based decision-making going forward, and really understanding, how citizens are using our different facilities and different amenities throughout our community. A number of different municipalities have been leveraging this for some time, more so at a walk and then run basis, where they kind of start small with a number of key facilities or key amenities throughout their municipality, and then scale it out to a number of different areas throughout their communities. So definitely the capabilities are there as we continue to evolve and connect our community.
Councilor? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good, thank you. Not seeing any further questions. Mr. Bowles.
Thank you. The next section talks about the industrial park and a number of planning projects that will help take the city, I think, to the next stage of growth. On a financial perspective, outside of the projects themselves, which we have a number of people, again, on here tonight to talk about. But from a financing perspective, I think I just want to highlight that with respect to D1, our model there is that the property we have that we want to turn into industrial park has value, and we're ultimately trying to prepare that land for resale, because we're going to resell that industrial park. And what we proposed as the funding source, similar to the marina funding source, is that we would internally finance it and require that project to have an ROI over time, to basically pay an interest rate back over a period of time. So I just want to be clear to council that we'd be internally financing that against reserves, that project. If we ever had to, pay that back, you would ultimately sell the properties. And that's how we're going to get the dollars back on that industrial park. We're not going to use taxpayer dollars right now on that. We're going to require that to be a self-sustaining project. So I thought that was just an important thing to identify to council with respect to these projects. There may be questions from council. I'm happy to answer some of them. Others on our team here may take the other ones.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Clayliff.
Through Mr. Mayor to Mr. Bowles, what exactly, can you give me the outline of the industrial park? What exactly where are we talking about?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councillor and council. I could give you the high levels, but Mr. Long, I believe, is here and he'll give you the exact specifics.
Thank you.
Mr. Long?
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor. So there's a couple of industrial parks that staff are looking at. One is on Invertose Road. The other one is on Ramey Road. Staff will be bringing an update report for closed session at the September 27th council meeting. So we will have some updates at that point, but those are the two industrial parks that we have in mind. As the name implies, our focus over the next couple of years is on getting those parks ready for market, ready for sale. Whether it's servicing, but even before we get to servicing, there's assessments and surveys and background studies that need to be completed. And that is the basis of our request for capital funding.
Councillor?
That's good, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, Mr. Bowles.
The next section of our budget is section E, where we have the parks and proposed parks budgets. The majority of this park work is going to be funded by grant funding. A couple of them, I think, have already had significant conversation at council and a significant amount of work, let's say, still to do, one being Lockview Park. A lot more community consultation is ongoing to get that one right. And we've identified in our project summaries that, and through the report itself, that part of the public process in this is that some of these projects will require continued public engagement, and Lockview Park is an example. And I just wanted to highlight that, well, not necessarily in this budget, but council did support the H.H. Knoll Parkette improvements just at the July meeting. And it was, I just thought it was significant enough just for council to recognize the amount of, I think, support going on to the park system within the city. And it's, and just to highlight to you as council and to the community that the work that's been done internally has allowed for about 85% of all of this park work to be done through grant funding. I think it's a testament to some of the work that staff has been doing to apply for this grant stuff.
Okay, questions on the parks? Councillor Clayliff, is your hand still up from before, or are you asking a question? Oh, there we go. Councillor Borgard. Thank you, Councillor Clayliff.
Through your worship to Director Bowles, I see that there's in-ground waste bins. Do we have a photo of that you can maybe share with council at some point?
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to the councilor and council, I don't have an in-ground picture, but I noticed that the Director of Public Works, Mr. Kalamoto, has come on to save me with a response.
Mr. Kalamoto.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor and all of councillor, I don't have one that I can provide immediately, but before the end of this meeting, I can forward a picture to the council members. Again, these are in-ground bins. There are a few contractors who put these in and suppliers. They are found in a multitude of many different municipalities around. So we can definitely get some stock photos and send out to the councilors.
Great, thank you. Councillor?
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, council? I don't see anyone.
Hey, can I say something? I can't get a gallery view here.
Oh, okay, just a sec. You're here. We can see you. No, I know it's you of us, but we know that you're here. So if you do put your hand up, we can still see it, Frank.
Not getting that option. Anyways, just on the E5 Main Street banners. Although our BIA hasn't got together for some time due to all the stuff that's going on, we do have some ideas that are not banners. They are like a permanent metal, steel, powder coated silhouettes and stuff like that. So, and it was something that we were going to, do with the high school, like Port High and stuff like that. It did get slowed down with what's been going on. But before we go too far with that E5, I just wanted to throw that out there that our Main Street BIA was looking into that. So just a little note for that one. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kawamoto.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we will obviously be speaking with the Main Street BIA when it comes to those banners. It is my understanding that we are also taking a look to see if we can get some other grant funding that would help beautify that particular area and along with the other BIA area. So we will be working with both BIAs hand in hand.
Great, thank you. Councillor Danch, is that all right?
Yeah, that's good. I'll talk to Chris down the road. Thanks so much.
Perfect, thank you. No further questions on parks. Mr. Bowles, roads and signage.
Yes, thank you. As we move over to roads and signage, I need to do a quick shout out to our communications, our manager of communications, Alex Peterson. I think she did a great job working with the whole team here to create the summary of where some of that artwork was happening. So the roads and signage chart, total budget's about 1.7 million, almost $1 million comes from grants. We have another 132 from the aggregate funding that we get on a regular basis. We budgeted based on what we got in 2020 because we haven't quite, you don't get each year you get the balance at the end of the year. So that's how we came up with that estimated figure. But 1.69 million is the total figure, and we've outlined the projects here. So if council does have any specific questions with respect to any of these projects, I know we already talked a little bit about sidewalks, and the sidewalk budget G7 does have 150,000 in it. It was increased by 20%, as was the asphalt resurfacing program was increased by 20%.
Okay, Councillor Baggett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions here. Some of the streetlight repairs, like on Clarence Street and that, like, is solar power of streetlights an option, or am I too far ahead of my time with technology, or is the cost so prohibitive we don't want to do something like that?
Mr. Kawamoto.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, you are right on time. It is LEDs that we usually retrofit. These particular streetlight repairs, however, are for ones that are just a little more complicated than changing the head. There are some electrical issues, some underground issues that are just a little bit more complicated, and that's why this particular one isn't really an operating issue with just changing the heads. It is more of a larger project, and that's why we've come forward in a capital project with this one, because it is above and beyond our normal streetlight repairs, just because of the complications of these particular ones.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you very much. Great answer. One other one is H1, the service club sign. I know I've been bugging staff for a couple of years regarding to get a service club sign. Mr. Shipakowski's taken probably the brunt of my inquiries, but I do thank staff. And just to make the record right, I guess this ask came from the former council that when he came down and blew over in storms and that, like the former, actually even the former mayor was pushing to get it put back up. So I do thank staff, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This also has to do with H1. I can remember working on, and you may recall, signs on Highway 3. There was one up close to Holloway Bay Road, and when you came down Highway 3, a service club sign. I seem to recall that the service clubs actually all threw in money to have those signs installed. Has that ever been approached through you to who's ever working on this or heading this up?
I'll go to Mr. Shapowski, I believe, is the one that's heading this up. Steve, do you have an answer for that?
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Bodnar. So we have approached a lot of the service clubs, and actually Luke Rowe in our events is actually doing that, and he's touched base with them. There are rental fees that are associated with them, but we are proposing that the city foot the bill for the initial installation of the sign, and then the maintenance after the fact would take part of the rental fees.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
But you are correct, Councillor. Back in the day when I was with the JCs, we actually did put out a few bucks at that time with all like the Lions Club, the Optimist, Kinsman, Gyros, and we actually paid for more than one sign. Might have been 3 at that time. Yeah.
Yep. Can I also ask something on H2?
Sure can.
Okay, so this is the sign renewal projects where we're going to look at the whole inventory and hopefully it says improve the city's image. Can I ask that when we're looking at this, will council get an example of some of these signs or what's going to be done with them before we actually move ahead with this?
Mr. Kalamoto?
That's my first question.
Yeah, Mr. Kalamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Public Works will be working with the Communications Department through the sign bylaws, all those other things. And yes, we can definitely come to council with some renderings and some examples as we move forward with the sign renewal process, if approved.
And the only reason I say that is sometimes you see a sign and we're anxious to put so much on it with a city logo and everything else. I think if you're looking at that sign, you kind of know you're in the city of Port Colborne. But, you know, I just like to see what we're saying on that sign to be front and center rather than a big city logo that's taking up space that may not be needed on those. So anyways, I'm just throwing that out there and I'll wait to see what you come up with. Thanks.
Also, Ms. Pedersen's on our meeting tonight in our communications department, which are the ones that developed the new logos and such. So maybe she would like to comment on this, on how this is going to move forward, because I know that department is involved. Alex, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Through you, Mayor, to Council. I'm currently working with the Economic Development team, Gary Long's team. So all signage, we are in the process of updating it. But to your request, we would be more than happy to share with you some concepts prior to moving forward. But all departments are aware of the new branding guidelines and are following through with that.
So Councillor Bodnar, the biggest answer I can give you on this is that when staff came up with the rebranding and the new logo and all that stuff is the fact that no longer are you going to go by one park and the sign is black and go by another park and the sign is blue, and everything is going to be standardized so that what you're asking for is hopefully that it comes to the point where you don't have to ask, because you know that it's all going to be standardized and actually giving you probably what you've asked for here tonight. So I think we all look forward to seeing that as we roll forward. I know Councillor Bruno's always had a big well, I don't know what the word is, but it's always been a craw in his saddle that the way some of our signage is done in the past. But I'll tell you what staff, both at the public works side and the communication side, has come out with. It is going to be a lot better for the city. A lot less confusion sometimes. So, anything further, Councillor Bodner?
No, all good, thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Clayliff?
Your worship. I just wondered, Mr. Kawamoto, G9, could you tell me where that fence and access gate, is that going to be hopefully Clarence and Rosemount onto the railway property?
Mr. Kawamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I think I might have to defer this one particularly to the manager, but I believe that the councillor is correct. I'd just like to get the confirmation from the manager.
That would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Shapowski, I believe he's on, and I do believe that you are correct. So I will just confirm with him. Yes, I see him nodding his head. Yes.
Great. That's good to know. I just had some residents ask me, so that they'll be happy to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question in regards to G4. Who owns the laneways? Is that city owned or are they privately owned?
Mr. Kawamoto?
I'm not sure who would answer that one.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we are looking at a multitude of the laneways. However, this work will only be done on the public right-of-way. So it would just be due to the entrances and then some of the publicly owned laneways.
Thank you.
And Councillor Wells, about 15 years ago, staff went through and determined all the laneways that we own and those that we don't own. And at that time, all the residents that lived on the laneways we don't own, because some of those we actually did maintain, that we were going to no longer maintain them. And a couple of them, one's off David Street between Sugarloaf and Adelaide. And the other one that comes to mind is off of Elm, just past West Pier Marine on Elm. It would go to the east side. It's actually privately owned by one landowner in there, even though it cuts through a bunch of landowners. So staff does have that list that was done about, as I say, 12, 15 years ago, because there were a number of laneways that we know that we knew we didn't own, but we still maintain them. And under the Municipal Act, we're not allowed to do that. So staff does have the up-to-date list of what we do own and what we don't.
Thank you. I was just curious.
Okay. No problem. Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. Surprise, surprise, sign renewal H2. I'm just wondering through you to Mr. Kawamoto, and with respect to, there is a parks master plan that talks about some changes in the overall park size or some parks. And so I'm wondering if we could start, as this is a phased approach, to those parks that perhaps have been identified that will not be having changes, to be the starting one. I'm assuming the next council may be looking at that in more detail, just so that when we're putting that sign in, not that it can't be moved, but that we get them right in the first place, with all effort to make that happen the first time. And secondly, I guess wanted to just side comment to Councillor Bodner. I've seen one of the signs that's already been in place before we sort of put things to a halt for a bit, and that was, and I know it was commented on, many people liked it, and that is the one at Nickel Beach. The one that maybe got my ear and wasn't as nice as I would have thought, just from a size perspective, is at Humberston Shoe Park, in terms of size perhaps being too small. So I think your point is well taken, that we have a look at it, but I think branding and standardizing them would be helpful. The one thing I wanted to ask through you to perhaps Mr. Kawamoto, or maybe it's Alex, is I just feel so strongly about our brand that I don't want to see it be on the short end of this. I'd rather take a year longer and do a good sign, tensile wise, so that it's not booted in or kicked down or marked up. And secondly, not be shy of where a park is on two streets, putting one at both ends. I mean, that's been a subject of debate, but I think in the whole scheme of things, whether you have 55 signs or 59 signs is not where we should be focusing our attention, but it should be on the brand and the aesthetic. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Kawamoto or Ms. Pedersen, any comments on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe I'll go first, then Alex can correct me and probably say things more intelligently than I can. But through to the councillor, yes, standardization is the key. Taking a look at size of parks, size of entrance ways, the view, all of those things will be taken into consideration. Again, not knowing what, not being able to control some of the bad actors. I'm not sure about vandalism and how we can control that, but we will make sure to, with any of our assets, try to make them as sturdy as possible and resistant as possible. And then obviously through communications and economic development, we will have, we have that branding, and we will do our best to create those signs that have the feeling that Port Colborne wants to portray, the welcoming feel, the standardization of the feel, the understanding that when you do take a look at that particular sign, you know where you are, you know you're in Port Colborne, and it is a welcoming and easily understood sign. So with that, I might turn it over to Alex, who can probably articulate what we will be doing, or economic development, and articulate what we will be doing better than I can.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. Appreciate it.
Ms. Pedersen?
Thanks, Chris. Through you, Mayor Steele, to council, to echo Chris's comments, we are working closely with all departments to ensure that standardized branding is maintained and sustained throughout the organization. As you've probably noticed with other communications projects, we have taken our time with the website, with various signage, stationery, items like that, because it is important that we get it right. And to us, we acknowledge that this is a multi-year, multi-phase approach when it comes to rebranding. But to your point, the new branding is, it really encompasses all that Port Colborne is. So we want to make sure that we highlight that. So we will take our time to make sure that we execute this appropriately and accordingly.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Okay, Mr. Bowles.
Thank you. The next area of our budget gets us hopefully a jump start on next year for storm sewer, wastewater, and water. So first we have the storm sewer budget coming forward. And I think just to talk a little bit to council about the financing of these, because prior to Venture Nickel storm might be of interest to council. When council approved the debt financing of the Nickel Storm Sewer project, the project ultimately, from the amount that staff requested, and we went forward through the Niagara region to debt finance, when all of the bills came in and it was finalized, it was a significant project, but there was still $573,000 left remaining. So staff will have the ability at council's discretion and guidance and approval to repurpose those funds to other projects. And that is a funding source for, I believe, the Neff Street project at the current, in this current budget. There would still be $273,000 remaining to be reallocated to a future storm sewer project in the future. If there are questions on that, I'm happy to answer those, but said another way, it's kind of like the city had approval to borrow X amount of dollars. It borrowed that. And it was good to see from a staff perspective that the cost came in under that figure. Going forward, we will look at the process on how to not have maybe the over borrowing component, but we will be able to, and council can redirect those funds to other long-term assets.
Okay, questions? Councillor Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is on I-2. Are we good to go there?
Yep.
Okay. So I just think this page deserves a shout out for the most spelling mistakes on any page in this binder. Not that that's a bad thing, maybe spell check wasn't working, but I guess it also proves that councilors do read every page of a budget document. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Any questions? Not seeing
Nope.
No, okay. Not seeing anyone else.
I had my hand up, Mr. Mayor. Is it not up?
No, you didn't put it up.
I'm sorry. Could I go ahead?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Director Kawamoto, on 1.3. I know you had mentioned that earlier when asked in the council meeting, so I'm thrilled to hear about that. With respect to Neff Street 1.1, I noticed today, like Steve's truck and some others down there at the end, I'm a little bit concerned about the amount allocated. I think it was 300,000. In that fixing whatever is jamming things there. I'm not sure is the answer, given that, at least from my perspective, if you're across the other side of the canal, the weir, and you look back at the end of Neff Street, and if you look back at it during the storm, you can't see the outfall because the outfall was below the water level. And so I'm concerned about two things. One is repairing a plug before the outfall gets water to a wall of water. And secondly is last night there was a consultant-led open house with respect to on Elm Street, the old Humberston builders, and the number of units going in there and the density, which I assume is going to come forward at some point in a public meeting. That adds more water to a system that has plugged, and I understand that that Neff outfall has a substantial area that it receives water from. That, and as we know, there are some areas in Humberston that feed into that, that if storm sewered, because they're now soakaways in some drains, is going to also add more water. And so I just don't want to spend good money after bad. And I'm wondering if other alternatives to a rising canal have been looked at. And is it perhaps better to not table this, but to move forward maybe on a solution that has more life in it than this plug up does now? So I know that's a lot to ask for. It's probably more a general council question, but given that this is a capital budget and there's money in it for Neff Street, I'm wondering what Mr. Kawamoto or Mr. Shapowski can say with respect to Neff Street outlet.
Mr. Kawamoto?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor and to all of council. This particular one is also taking a look at the investigative works that need to be done and the analysis that needs to be done before moving ahead with the actual retrofit. So it's an all-encompassing proposed request. However, as we understand it more, as we investigate more, as we analyze more, a one-for-one retrofit or a reconstruction as is may not be the appropriate way to handle some of this stormwater coming from that Neff Street drainage area. With regard to new development, as was stated before, growth has to pay for growth. And that is another thing that we look at through development. We do have to make sure that the pre and the post flow of the stormwater flow, surface stormwater flow, is the same when development does occur. There have also been some advancements into stormwater technology over the past number of years. We call LIDs, the low impact developments. Those may be some other options as we take a look. But right now, what we have proposed here is both the investigative work, the analysis, and a potential solution. So that is sort of all encompassed in this this one request with regard to that. And with a few of the unknowns, that is why the dollar figure is as it is. I do believe that in the meeting too, we do have the capital project supervisor, Salez, that may be able to answer any particular questions or specific questions that councillors may have. If I can ask him to go on, or if I can ask the councillors if there are any specific ones that he may be able to answer more appropriately.
Okay, Mr. Salas, anything to add to Councillor Bruno's question?
Through the mayor to Councillor Bruno, yes, we did recognize all the concerns that you just discussed. We're putting together a request for proposal to hire a consultant to do the design, but at the same time, we have a retained consultant looking at a functionality of different options that we could investigate. One of them, of course, is the one-to-one solution, replacing whatever is plugging that outfall to the canal. Probably it's an issue of blockage or capacity issue. So as part of our investigation for the functional design, we're also looking at a functional investigation of what's happening upstream with existing infrastructure, whether it's got the capacity. We are aware of the development that could happen in the area. So that's part of our pre-investigation that's happening. So there are other two options that we're looking at. You are correct. The outfall is perpetually submerged. Potentially, one of the probable solutions is to outfall that outlet downstream on the other side of Main Street, past the weir infrastructure. If all in failing, probably we might end up with a permanent pumping station. But all of these things, I guess my point is, we have looked at all different types of options. We have not decided what direction we should be going, but we got competent consultants working on us on how to best address it, and being careful that the solution that we pick would be the right solution. It will be a permanent solution that would provide opportunities also for future development.
Thank you. Councillor Bruno?
Gentlemen, outstanding. I couldn't have asked for anything more than that type of thorough long-term investigation and alternatives. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Councillor Danch?
Just because you're on the end of my street there when you talk about Neff there and that, and certainly see the pumps there. We've had a few residents in that area that have been flooded too many times. And is there any way this so-called pipe could be moved above the water level to let it discharge what it needs to get rid of? Because it's been a constant battle there for a few of the residents there on King Street. And I don't know. I mean, we can do all the studies we want. We need to correct this problem. I know I've looked at this person a few times face to face with almost tears in her eyes, and like, we need to get this fitted. I don't know if it's a pumping station or just maybe get the pipe up a little bit and get it to go directly into the weir and not below the weirs. That would probably like not slow it down or restrict its capabilities.
Mr. Kawamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely, Councillor, those are some options that we will be looking at. Obviously, in these kind of situations, we will be asking the engineers as they look at it and examine it and understand it a little bit better once they have that examination, is to start thinking outside the box to see what other options are available. So as Supervisor Salas did say, it is not just potential fixing it. It is potential new options of new ways of creating that flow of water so that the residents and other properties are not flooded. We also obviously have to take into account the climate change and the growth of some stronger storms. So as we move forward with a permanent solution, we have to ensure with the engineers that that permanent solution also takes into account those stronger storms.
Councillor?
Well, let's hope for the best, Dave, because I know these people down there, they've been struggling. And I know the storm sewer in front of my house, the water can be just rushing by. And I'm at 73 Neff, and there's times when that thing is just bone dry. So obviously there is a water situation there. Just food for thought. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Any further questions?
Mr. Mayor? Yes.
Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. I know you touched on it in your last sentence before turning to Chris. I'm wondering for a future date if I could have perhaps some numbers as to what the new generating storm sewer fee will produce going forward, given the refund, the balance, and what's projected, because I will still want to speak at a future meeting to the upstream storm or lack of storm sewers that feed into Bartok. But that's not for tonight, but I'm just wondering if you could tee that up. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bowles?
Yep, through the mayor to the councillor and council, between the nickel storm sewer funds that have not been spent, the 273 on our slide, there will also be reserves of approximately $80,000 in the storm sewer budget that will be able to be purposed to new projects as they come up. So there's a total of about $350,000 that can still be repurposed to storm sewer fees. And then post the 2022 year on a go-forward basis, the capital budget for storm sewer is going to be over 160,000 of unallocated funds. So that's kind of like the trajectory without additional increases to the storm sewer fee. But just in summary, about 350,000 unallocated funds for storm sewers that can be put to work for new projects that council and public works identify.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Kalamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, we discussed about the storm sewer fee. Public Works staff is working with finance staffs on the boundary of the storm sewer, understanding what the financial implications may be, and we will be reporting back to council once that work is done. We expect that to be either next month or shortly thereafter.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Okay, thank you. And seeing no further questions, wastewater, Mr. Bowles.
Thank you, Mayor. I think when it comes to wastewater, there's a number of projects, and council has access to the details of each of those projects. I think what we identify here is these grants, unlike many of the others, have not been received. It's an application that we're putting forward. So similar to, I guess, the waterfront. Should we not receive these grants, we would be back in front of council saying that we aren't moving forward with the project. So the projects of, I believe it's J4 and J5 are grant specific, and should we not receive the grants, we won't move forward. And having said that, maybe before moving to questions on the wastewater, I was hoping to tee up our manager of water wastewater to provide an update on the water wastewater flows. She had a calculation because she was having conversations with our partners in the Niagara region and had updated flow information, which we thought might be of interest to council tonight. I was hoping to tee her up earlier in the presentation, but I think now is a better time than no time. So maybe our manager of water wastewater, if she could come on.
Yeah, Ms. Sutter?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Bowles. Yes, I've done our data analysis up until the end of July for wastewater flows. I don't have the I have the wastewater flows from the region, sorry, to the end of August, but I don't have the lake levels yet for the end of August. So right now, to the end of July, our wastewater flows to the region are down 27% over the same period in 2020. So we sent about 1.9 million cubic meters of wastewater to the plant to the end of July this year versus 2.6 million cubic meters over the same period in 2020. Rainfall is down nearly 17% over the same period in 2020. We had 430 millimeters of rain so far in 2021 to the end of July versus 517 millimeters. Half of the precipitation we received in July. That one storm on July 17th was 109 millimeters of rain from the region's calculations, and our total was actually 195 millimeters of rain in July. So July was very wet. And our flow to the region in July definitely reflected that. It was the highest flow we'd had all calendar year. The lake is down 21% over the same period in 2020. So as I said, currently we're down 27% over the same period to 2020. And I'm forecasting that, of course, completely dependent upon the weather, that we might be 34% lower than we were in 2020. So that's fantastic news with our portion of the region's bill moving forward. And on the water side, since we're here, we may as well talk about water as well. We are currently sitting, as of the end of August, we are sitting at 67.4% metered versus 62.6% over the same period in 2020. So we have reduced our unaccounted for water by nearly 5% over the same period last year. Our purchases from the region are actually 8% lower than they were in 2020, but our sales to our customers are virtually identical to what they were in 2020. Very little difference. So it's looking like we're going to be around 8% lower altogether in 2021. With our purchases, that's where it looks like we're going. So staff have been doing a fantastic job in addressing any leaks that happen, being very conservative with the water they're using, and it's nice to see those downward trends.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Sutter. Take questions now, Mr. Bowles. Is that all right?
Yes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councilor Bagan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First question is, could Darlene send that report to the councilors? It's a lot of information. I can't write that fast. And I think a lot of residents, when they have questions, we could, as councilors could tell them some of the rates are down, some are up. If that would be possible, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Darlene, you can get that out?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Next question, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yep.
To you. The Clark Street talk here, it talks about the Clark area. Is that the whole street from Calais to Main Street, or is there a certain section of Clark Street we're talking about, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Kawamoto?
Actually, I can take that one, Mr. Mayor.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Clark area is actually the entire area serviced by the region's Clark Street pumping station. So that is the entire east side north of Kalali Street, all the way north of Main Street as well. So that is the Clark area.
Councilor?
Thank you very much, Darlene. It helped a lot. The backup in the bar talk, like we have one of the pumps we're buying for the sanitary sewer for here, and when I read this report about the backup in these 70 homes, I'm glad we're getting a pump, but I definitely would like to see some sort of report about how we can fix this so we don't have to use the pump, Mr. Mayor. I know Councilor Bruno probably has a lot more information than I do about the Bartok area, but I'm just going by what I read in the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Darlene, can you answer that, or Mr. Kawamoto?
Sure, maybe I will start off. My apologies again for clicking the button. I'm glad that the manager replied into the last one, more familiar with the geography, especially that specific area in the Janet area. With regard to Bartok, there are a few things that we are doing. The manager has applied or will be applying to the regions for some additional funds. We are looking at some spot repairs for the entire, what we call the Omer area, as that Bartok is the one that is one of the lines that feed into that particular pumping station. We are also going to be CCTVing, which is videoing those existing pipes from Bartok all the way through to the region's pumping station. Another thing that we will be doing is discussing with the region what their restrictions are within that pumping station. Something that we have already done is increase communication with the region with regard to when they do get alarms at their pumping station. Obviously, we don't have any within our system, but as information flows and communication flows, we will be increasing those and formalizing some of those methodologies of communication specifically for that area, but throughout the entire city with regard to the regional pumping stations and staff. So those are a few things that we're doing. We're also going to be investigating certain lines that that connect again with regard to the system, where Bartok connects to Elm, where Elm connects to Omer, and all of the areas that that flow into that. Those are some additional investigations that we have that we will be moving forward with. So those are just some of the things that are going to be happening in the short and medium term. Maybe if there's any particular questions, maybe the manager will be able to answer them more specifically.
Okay, Councillor Bagu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll leave the rest to the Ward 3 councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to staff for putting the attention on the Clark Street area. That's a 40-year problem that is, I know that the residents there are going to be keeping their fingers crossed that the funding applications are successful, but it is very important to show them that staff is really working on it, they're understanding it, and reaching out to try to get the money for it. So really important, and I do thank you. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions on the wastewater? Seeing none. Mr. Bowles, water.
So when we get to the water program, there are two projects. One being K2 is again grant specific, requiring the grant to move forward. And I thought it would be appropriate to remind council and anybody that may be reading our capital budget that it was just, I think at the last council meeting or the council meeting before that council took direct action on water to continue to try to improve the water infrastructure of the city and invested 1.8, almost 1.9 million in the Erie Street water main. Having provided that, just a little additional information on the financing, maybe I open it up back to council for any questions and our manager of water and wastewater and director of public works to speak about these two projects.
Okay, any questions on these two projects, council? I'm not seeing any. Oh, Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. I was almost like a resident on Erie Street knew we were going to talk about this tonight, perhaps, and funding was a message left for me. And the question was a great one in that even though they haven't received notices of when construction was started, the first phone call about how can I participate, when can I do my side of the lateral, the curb stop, and how much money can I get towards it, and should I have my contractor wait till they're digging the trench to his house, or should he connect now on the private side and go to the curb stop, and then when the city comes in, and does that lateral, it'll just be the curb stop. So through to Mr. Kawamoto, or Darlene, I'm wondering if there will be some kind of a package sent out other than just the notice that's been done, because obviously without the notice and just us talking at council, there's a lot of interest in people doing their private side. And I know that's not directly related to tonight's capital budget, but while I had your ear and you were going to talk about Erie Street, I was going to throw that in.
Mr. Kawamoto?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, we thought the private side issues are important. That maybe I can say stay tuned for the operating budget, because that is where it's going to be put in and talked about. As councillor mentioned, we will be asking for some funds for the private side to assist in those reconstructions of a sanitary lateral or of a particular water section 2 on the private side. So those will be upcoming in the budget. I'm sorry I don't have the slide memorized, but maybe the Director of Finance can say the exact dates. But that will be in the in a request coming up for the operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Councilor.
you.
Good. Any further questions on the water, the 2 projects that are listed here? Seeing none. Cultural block, Mr. Bowles.
Thank you. On the cultural block, we included the library, the museum, and Roselon. A number of projects put forward. Specifically with Roselon, there were funds put aside a number of years ago to start doing some work on Roselon, and I know there was a large grant that went in. The city was not successful in that grant request. As such, the funds were returned back to the reserve, and these projects here would be then funded from that reserve. Just another point out, just from a technical perspective, the library was a bit of the city's guinea pig. Our supervisor of facilities worked with our librarian, did a great job doing a building condition assessment of the library. And the one outstanding issue that I think was really more immediate that it identified was that the window seals had to be replaced. And I think that's just an example of how some of these longer term plans of what needs to be done in facilities and when will be used. And that happened there with the library, and that's where the window seal remediation project was added to the capital budget. If there are any questions, I appreciate. I believe staff from the library and the museum are on tonight.
Okay. Any questions on this, council? Okay. Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Danch.
Hey, sorry, once again, through you there, when you talk about window seal, you're talking about the thermal units are leaking and they're foggy? Is that the issue?
Mr. Thomas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council. The term is fairly vague. It's titled window seal remediation. It is partially removal of old failed caulking and recaulking. And due to the commercial construction of the existing windows, there are some aluminum grid removals and seals within the aluminum casings that are to be replaced. I haven't gone through the actual proposal with a fine-tooth comb, to be honest, until approved. However, that's my understanding that they will be looking at the seals and the caulking on all the windows throughout the library.
Councillor?
Just to replace a thermal unit is not a big task. They're generally removed from the inside. You pull the stops off, so you don't have to replace the window. You have to replace the thermal unit. This is a standard procedure. Before we invest a whole lot of time and money in that, I think we look at what's wrong with the window. There's a couple of units in City Hall. The seal's gone. That's all there is to it. You don't have to replace the whole unit. You just have to replace the glass. But just food for thought. I mean, that's what I do every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Seeing none. Cemetery, one project here, the P1.
Yep, through yourself, Mayor, to Council, there is one project that's identified in the capital budget with respect to cemetery land acquisitions, which I believe have been discussed with Council previously, but if there are any questions, I believe Mr. Long is on tonight that can help us.
Okay, any questions on the cemetery land acquisition? I don't see any. Okay, beaches.
With the beaches, through yourself, Mayor, to Council, I know that there are always lots of questions about the beaches, and there is a significant ask, so we did add a couple bullet points for the community. Just a year in review, we had about 150 guests maximum from outside of the city. I think users are general, what we heard was they liked the pace of the beach. The port pass seemed to go over well received, as well as the beach policies and procedures. Certainly, I think helped even reduce the vandalism substantially at the beach during the course of the year. Things that we heard were really about washrooms, and washrooms. People want washrooms at the beach. As well as, I think going into next year, we'll be back to Council talking about the Centennial Cedar Bay pricing model. It was obviously a first time through it. I think it worked well. I think staff thought it worked well, and I think the community, our understanding is, thought it worked well having staff out there. But we may need to tweak our pricing model a little bit going forward, going into 2022, and we'll be back to Council on that. And then as we look at some of the beach requests here, just to give a flavor of where we're looking at for next year and how to continue to fund the beach. COVID, not necessarily knowing where COVID will be, we continue to plan for it. We believe that it's going to be essential to consider limiting a capacity max, but we may be looking at recommending, and this is not a recommendation today, but we may be looking at a 200 guest maximum. We also heard a desire, and I think in talking to some councillors about our Monday to Friday during non-holidays, the number of people that go to the beaches is down. Not necessarily down year over year, but you have a lot fewer people that come Monday to Friday. And there was a suggestion that perhaps we could introduce a Niagara residence pass for Monday to Friday, where people could buy the pass and use it more like the participate pass, where they didn't have to pre-book. So that way, if it was might rain in the afternoon, they could still come for 2 hours. So people to our neighbors in Waynfleet and Welland, et cetera, could jot down and do that. So it's something that staff is looking at as we continue to look into the new year. So those are just a couple comments, and then obviously the beach asks. The first is, if Council recalls, the suggestion was made, and what we've done is we view the beach reserve as a beaches reserve. It's for Centennial, Cedar Bay, and Nickel Beach. And one of the projects that we would recommend utilizing the funds for is Centennial Park septic replacement. And our supervisor of facilities, I believe, is taking the lead or has the background on that, if there's any questions. And then the other projects are washrooms, as well as like a staff/first aid building. And what we're recommending is these be movable. And for those that have read the documents, and I learned today that all council has, so that's fantastic. Our goal is to make these movable, given the harsh weather that we have there. Permanent fencing that was perimeter fencing that was identified in the lease contract required, and the new parkette/food vendor is proposed. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer those. Our manager of recreation could not be with us tonight.
Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. I don't know, Brian, whether you'd want me to answer this or ask this under the operating budget, but initial planning thoughts going forward. Bullet 3, introduced for Niagara Region residents, Nickel Beach weekday passes. You mentioned about that they would purchase them. would that have any negative impact on revenue based on what people outside Port Colborne but within the Niagara region were paying last year?
No, we don't believe you're going to, through the mayor to council, to councilor and council, we don't believe you're going to have a negative impact on revenue where you're going to have a trade-off based on the information that we're gathering. We're still processing it, and we aren't looking for council to make a recommendation or make a decision today, as we're going to do a full debrief. We as staff just know how interested the community is, as well as council is, in the beaches, and thought that in the direction of adding these additional amenities, it may be prudent to start the communication process of some of the things that we heard as initial thoughts, and we will bring back a full report on the future of this, as well as analysis of what we think the trade-off is, although we do believe it's going to be pretty small with respect to these passes, i.e. other people that would have bought a pass anyways.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Any further questions on that one? I don't see any. Sugarloaf Marina.
Oh, sorry, through the mayor to council, as we go to the marina, this slide here that you all have, the top right is just an indication of kind of where the fence is. You can see the jagged amount where you'll see that going forward. On Sugarloaf Marina, again, knowing that this is becoming a self-sustaining entity and staff have identified it will be self-sustaining, we have, when we bring back the T2, you're going to see where we are with respect to the progress of self-sustaining, and you're going to see in the 2022 operating budget, a Sugarloaf Marina that continues to cover its costs and not be, I guess, a burden or a cost to the levy. So as we do that, highlights for council to know, we did have a record season of 510 seasonal boaters. Council tours were conducted, and we appreciate council's interest and willingness to come to those. We are looking, and we have found an increase in boats being stored in the summer, dry storage. It has been a problem for the parking lots. It has been a problem for moving boats around in certain locations, and that's why one of the projects that we proposed is to expand boat fencing on the other side of the tracks. Operating budget figures are going to be available for the trimester 2. We do again indicate that this is going to be and is self-sustaining and will not be a cost on the levy. A couple of things looking forward. Again, we are continuing to plan for COVID. We have had some complaints and between boaters, and we do anticipate introducing, going into next season, maybe a more robust boater contract with a boater code of conduct, re-emphasizing that. Options to digitize the registration and payment process. Everything's very manual there, as well as the whole concept about customer service. We've had great success at City Hall with customer service, and we're looking to create greater integration, so that way in the future, if somebody wants to pay for their marina bill at City Hall or vice versa, they'd be able to transact at both locations. We've said it before, and we continue to say it, that in order to bring the marina to a fully self-sustaining entity, certain fees are going to see a 10 to 15% increase. We said that with last year's, but then we're going to start to see the downward normalization. And as we present the operating budget, we're going to present a 3-year preview of the funding model, which I think will help give council and voters that certainty to what the future looks like on the cost model. And that hopefully will fulfill the business case objective that council has put out in front of us. Again, this is self-sustaining, And that's where we projected the projects that were listed here and in your council package. I guess the last slide that I have, and maybe I should have put it earlier, is some of the proposed projects, just for clarity. We had some pictures of the coverage zones of the Wi-Fi, the telehandler, and potentially where the gating system may end up going. And if we can extend the gating system, I guess it's further south, we will certainly, ground and ownership, I think, of our ownership permitting. If there's any questions, happy to take them.
Great. Councilor Baga?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. To Director Bowles, over a year ago, we hired a consultant to do a business study of the marina. And from what I talking to you, I don't think staff was completely happy with the report, and you guys were going to look into it a little bit more, then report back to council. Is that report still going to come back, or is this going to be tied in with the operation requests?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to council, our anticipation is in the operating budget, where everybody asks for their dollars, we're going to have a special appendix for the Sugarloaf Marina that will identify a multi-year budget model, as well as a summary of the kind of findings and as well as a summary of justification for the fee comparison to comparators. And then from there, if council is looking for additional information, we're happy to continue to provide it from another report after that.
Councilor?
I'm good, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Not seeing any. We're on to the thank yous, Mr. Bowles.
To the mayor and council, thank you for all your time tonight. I know it takes a long time to get through these budgets. There's a lot going on in this city and a lot of great and exciting things going on. And I love the pictures that people have taken across the city in the rainbow in this last one, where there's, I guess there's no rainbow tonight. It's 10 o'clock, but it is a great picture. So just moving forward, the recommendation is the recommendation in the report, and staff are still happy to take any questions that council may have.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bowles, and thank you, staff, for attending. Questions then? Councilor Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question. I didn't see anything for the grain elevators in the capital budget. Are we okay there? Everything is good on that side?
Mr. Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor to council, we actually have that as one of our programs grants section of the operating budget, where we show the dollars we get in, and then we maintain a maintenance budget for them that we transfer to reserves. And our reserve policy identifies it's a working reserve. So when the maintenance is done, we do transfer the funds to pay for that maintenance just out of that reserve. For council's purposes, I'm happy to even write a separate report just to show what some of the maintenance costs have been going on, or send it to any councilor that is interested. The team at the elevator does a great job sticking within our budget allotment from the operating budget, and have always done that and continue to do so.
Councilor?
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any further questions on this? Seeing none, we have a recommendation moved and seconded, was put on the floor. I'll make sure nobody has any more questions before I take the vote. Do you want to put the entire thing up so I can see, please? Oh, Brian, can you stop sharing your screen? Perfect, thank you. Councilor Beauregard.
Through your worship, to maybe the clerk, as I read the motion, are we choosing one, either the director or the Director of Corporate Services or the Director of Public Works to award and sign contracts? Like, do we have to choose one, or are we choosing both? I'm just not sure about based on the recommendation.
Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, it is the CAO plus one of either the Director of Public Works or the Director of Corporate Services.
3 people, but 2 consign.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, council, seeing no further questions, calling the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? That's carried. There being no further items this evening, we are now adjourned. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff.